Nero Wolfe and the Colonial Debt. It was a Friday in early November, and the rain was coming down the way it does in New York when the city decides autumn is officially over and winter is moving in without an invitation. I was at my desk in the office, working through correspondence that had piled up during Wolfe's latest bout of refusing to take any cases that didn't interest him, which lately meant refusing every case, period. Fritz Brenner appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled in that particular way that meant someone unexpected was at the door and he wasn't sure how to handle it. "Archie," he said quietly, "there is a gentleman at the entrance. He has no appointment, but he insists he must speak with Mr. Wolfe about a matter of life and death. He is quite agitated." I glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:20. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms with Theodore, communing with his orchids, and would remain there until 11 o'clock. Disturbing him before then was grounds for termination, or at least a lecture that felt like termination. "Tell him to come back at 11, I said. "Or better yet, make an appointment for Monday." I attempted that. He says he cannot wait. He has traveled from London specifically to see Mr. Wolfe, and he believes his life is in danger. Fritz paused. He also says he is willing to pay $25,000 for Mr. Wolfe's services. That got my attention. 25,000 would buy a lot of orchids, beer and Fritz's excellent cooking. It might even convince Wolfe to leave his chair for something other than meals and plant maintenance. Through the office window, bulletproof, like all the windows in the brownstone, since that unpleasant incident with the sniper 2 years ago, I could see a man on the stoop. He was perhaps 50, wearing an expensive but rain-soaked overcoat, and carrying a leather briefcase that he clutched like it contained the crown jewels. He kept glancing up and down West 35th Street, as if expecting someone to materialize out of the rain and grab him. Caesar appeared beside Fritz, the massive Doberman moving with his characteristic silent authority. At 95 pounds of black and tan muscle, Caesar was the alpha of our 6-dog security system, and he took his responsibilities seriously. He studied the man through the window with the same professional assessment a Secret Service agent gives a potential threat. "Caesar approves?" I asked Fritz. "He has not barked, but he is." That was Caesar's way. He didn't waste energy on obvious threats. Those got the full treatment of aggressive barking and intimidation displays. But Caesar's silence didn't mean approval. It meant evaluation. I stood and walked to the front hallway, where I could get a better look through the door's frosted glass panel. Mars joined me, the second largest Doberman and the pack's enforcer. Unlike Caesar's calm assessment, Mars radiated controlled aggression, ready to act the moment Caesar gave the signal. Loyal, our brick-red pit bull, padded into the hallway and sat beside my desk, his intelligent brown eyes watching the door with that unwavering focus that had carried him 200 miles through wilderness to reach this address 2 years ago. The white blaze on his chest caught the morning light filtering through the window. His leather collar, handmade by Fritz with Loyal tooled into the leather and a brass plate engraved with our address, gleamed dully. I opened the door 6 inches, keeping the chain engaged. "Yes?" The man's face was drawn with exhaustion and fear. "Mr. Goodwin? Archie Goodwin? My name is James Ashcroft. I must see Nero Wolfe immediately. I'm being followed. Someone tried to kill me in London 3 days ago, and I believe they've tracked me here to New York. Mr. Wolfe is engaged until 11. You can wait inside if you'd like, but you won't see him until then." "I'll wait. Please, just let me inside. I feel terribly exposed out here." I studied him for a moment. He looked genuinely frightened, not just performing anxiety to get in the door. His hands were shaking, and his eyes kept darting to the street. "Arms out, feet apart," I said. "I need to check you for weapons." He complied without protest. I patted him down thoroughly. He was clean except for a fountain pen and a wallet. I stepped aside and released the chain, letting him enter. Caesar and Mars examined him with professional interest as he crossed the threshold, water dripping from his coat onto Fritz's immaculate floor. Loyal remained seated but alert, his eyes tracking Ashcroft's every movement. "These are your guard dogs?" Ashcroft asked, his voice a mix of nervousness and admiration. "These are 3 of them. We have 6 total. They're trained professionals, not pets. Don't try to pet them. Don't make sudden movements. And definitely don't try to go anywhere in this house without permission." "Understood." He glanced at Loyal. "That one's a pit bull, isn't he? Unusual to see one with Dobermans." "Loyal earned his place here. Long story." I gestured toward the front room. "You can wait in there. Fritz will take your coat and get you coffee. But understand, you won't see Mr. Wolfe until 11, and even then only if he agrees to meet with you. The 25,000 helps, but it doesn't guarantee anything." Ashcroft nodded gratefully. Fritz escorted him to the front room, took his dripping coat, and disappeared toward the kitchen to fetch coffee. I returned to my desk and watched Ashcroft through the doorway. He sat on the edge of the sofa, briefcase on his lap, hands still shaking slightly. Every few seconds he glanced at the windows as if expecting them to shatter and admit whoever was chasing him. The bulletproof glass wouldn't shatter, but I didn't mention that. Let him stay nervous. Nervous clients told the truth faster. At precisely 11 o'clock, I heard Wolfe's elevator descending. He emerged and negotiated his seventh of a ton around the corner, into the office, with the careful deliberation of an ocean liner docking. He was wearing a yellow shirt that made his massive face look even more Buddha-like than usual, and his eyes, the color of dark honey, swept the room with their customary assessment before settling on me. "Archie," Fritz informs me, "we have a visitor who wishes to pay us a considerable sum. 25,000. He's from London, says someone tried to kill him 3 days ago, and he thinks they followed him here. Name's James Ashcroft. He's been waiting in the front room for 40 minutes, and looks like he's about to jump out of his skin." Wolfe settled into his chair with a sigh that suggested the world was conspiring against his comfort. "Very well, show him in. And Archie, remain present with your notebook. If he's being pursued by killers, I want every detail recorded." I brought Ashcroft into the office. Up close and in better light, I could see he was well dressed in an expensive British suit, with the kind of face that suggested generations of good breeding and private schools. But there were dark circles under his eyes, and his hand still trembled slightly as he set his briefcase on his lap. Wolfe studied him with the focused attention he usually reserved for rare orchids. "Mr. Ashcroft, you've traveled from London to see me. I trust the matter is important enough to justify the distance." "It is." Ashcroft's voice was cultured, educated, with that crisp British accent that always made me think of BBC radio broadcasts. "Mr. Wolfe, 3 days ago someone tried to kill me in my London office. A man I'd never seen before entered my building, bypassed security, and attempted to strangle me with a length of rope. I managed to fight him off barely, and he fled when my secretary screamed. The police investigated but found nothing. No fingerprints, no identification, no leads. Why did this person wish to kill you?" Because of this, Ashcroft opened his briefcase and removed a leather-bound ledger, perhaps 100 years old, the pages yellowed and brittle. He set it carefully on Wolfe's desk. "This belonged to my great-grandfather, Colonel Sir Reginald Ashcroft, who served in India during the 1850s. He was stationed in Agra during the Sepoy Rebellion. This ledger documents certain activities." Wolfe made no move to touch the ledger. "What sort of activities?" "Theft, primarily. Systematic looting of temples, palaces, and private homes during the suppression of the rebellion. My great-grandfather kept meticulous records of what was taken, where it went, and how much he profited." Ashcroft's face was pale. "Mr. Wolfe, I am the descendant of a thief. My family's wealth, our estate, our position, everything is built on colonial-era plunder, and now someone wants me dead because of it." "Why would they want you dead? You didn't commit the crimes. Your great-grandfather has been dead for—" Wolfe paused, calculating, nearly a century. "Because I'm trying to make amends." Ashcroft leaned forward. 2 months ago, I began researching the items my great-grandfather stole. I've been trying to locate their descendants or rightful owners, so I can return what remains or provide restitution. I've spent 2 months investigating, documenting, reaching out to scholars and museums, and 3 days ago, someone tried to kill me. Who knew about your research? Dozens of people, museum curators, historians, Indian cultural officials, antiquities dealers. I've been quite open about it. I thought transparency was the right approach." He laughed bitterly. "I was wrong." Wolfe picked up the ledger carefully and opened it. His eyes scanned the pages, columns of items, dates, locations, valuations. I watched his expression shift from mild interest to intense focus. When Wolfe's brain engaged like that, you could almost hear the gears turning. "This is extraordinary," Wolfe murmured. "Your great-grandfather was nothing if not thorough. He documented every transaction, every bribe paid, every item's provenance. This is a historical record of systematic theft on a massive scale. It's a record of my family's shame, Ashcroft said quietly. And now it's going to get me killed. Not necessarily. If you're willing to pay $25,000, I assume you want me to identify who wishes you dead and why. But I suspect you also want something more. You want protection, and you want me to help you complete your restitution project without being murdered in the process. Yes, exactly that. Ashcroft pulled an envelope from his briefcase. This arrived at my hotel this morning, the Waldorf Astoria. It was slipped under my door sometime during the night. He handed the envelope to Wolfe. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. You meddle in affairs that do not concern you. The past should remain buried. Return to London and abandon your research, or you will not leave New York alive. This is your only warning. Wolfe set the letter down with distaste. Amateur intimidation. Theatrical but unspecific. Still, the threat may be genuine. He looked at Ashcroft directly. I will accept your case on one condition. You will tell me the complete truth about your great-grandfather's activities, about your research, and about everyone you've contacted. If you lie to me, even by omission, I will withdraw immediately and keep your retainer as compensation for wasted time. I agree. Excellent. Archie, take Mr. Ashcroft's statement. I want names, dates, locations, and complete details about his research. Then find him secure accommodations, not the Waldorf. Someone knows he's there. Perhaps the Hotel Churchill on West 47th. Register him under a false name. Wolfe glanced at the clock. It's nearly lunchtime. Mr. Ashcroft, you'll join us. Fritz is preparing lamb stew, and I find that difficult conversations are easier over good food. Ashcroft looked like he might cry from relief. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. You have no idea what this means to me. I have some idea. Inherited guilt is a powerful motivator, and attempted murder tends to focus the mind. Wolfe stood. Archie, ensure the dogs remain on elevated alert. If someone followed Mr. Ashcroft here, they may attempt to enter the brownstone. I will not have my lunch disturbed by assassins. As Fritz escorted Ashcroft to the dining room, I checked the security arrangements. Caesar and Mars were positioned at the front. Apollo had taken up his station at the rear entrance. Minerva was on the second-floor landing watching the stairs. Diana was patrolling the basement, and Loyal had made himself comfortable under my desk, his favorite position when things were interesting. Through the bulletproof window, I watched the rain continue to fall on West 35th Street. Somewhere out there, maybe close, maybe far, was someone who'd tried to kill James Ashcroft in London and had followed him to New York to finish the job. They'd have to get through 6 trained guard dogs, bulletproof glass, reinforced doors, Fritz's vigilance, and me. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But then I remembered colonial-era theft, family shame, and someone desperate enough to kill over historical injustice. This wasn't going to be a simple case of identifying a killer and collecting a fee. This was going to be about debts, debts that transcended time, transcended law, and couldn't be repaid with money alone. And Nero Wolfe, for all his brilliance, was about to discover that some debts can't be settled from the comfort of a custom-made chair in a fortified brownstone. Some debts require you to wade into history's mud and come out knowing that justice, even when achieved, isn't always satisfying. I pulled out my notebook and headed for the dining room, where Ashcroft was probably already praising Fritz's lamb stew. The case of the colonial debt had begun, and I had a feeling it was going to get a lot more complicated before it got simpler. Fritz's lamb stew was, as expected, perfect, tender meat falling off the bone, vegetables cooked to exactly the right texture, and a rich gravy that suggested hours of patient reduction. Ashcroft ate with the desperate hunger of a man who hadn't had a proper meal in days, which was probably accurate given his state of anxiety. Wolfe ate with his usual focused attention, refusing to discuss business until after the meal. That was his rule. Good food deserved respect and concentration. Talk of murder and theft could wait until the plates were cleared. Over coffee, served in the office, where Fritz had arranged comfortable chairs for all of us, Ashcroft told his story in full. My great-grandfather, Colonel Sir Reginald Ashcroft, was posted to Agra in 1856, he began, cradling his coffee cup like it might provide warmth against the chill of what he was about to reveal. He was 32 years old, ambitious, and according to family letters, remarkably greedy. When the Sepoy Rebellion broke out in 1857, he saw opportunity. Wolfe had the ledger open on his desk, occasionally turning pages as Ashcroft spoke. The rebellion began in May 1857. British forces spent months retaking cities. Agra was besieged for several months before being relieved. Exactly. During the siege and the subsequent military actions, my great-grandfather systematically looted temples, aristocratic homes, and public treasuries. The ledger documents it all, 137 separate incidents of theft over 18 months. Ashcroft's voice was flat, emotionless. He'd clearly repeated these facts to himself many times. Sacred objects, jewelry, cash, manuscripts, weapons, art. He took everything of value he could carry or ship. I was taking notes, but I paused to ask, how much are we talking about in total? In 1857, valuations, approximately £42,000 sterling. In modern currency, Ashcroft did some mental arithmetic. Probably close to £2 million, perhaps $3 million American. I let out a low whistle. That's a serious fortune. It is. And it's the foundation of everything my family has today. Our estate in Kent, our London townhouse, our investments, all of it traces back to my great-grandfather's theft. He set down his coffee cup. I grew up believing we were landed gentry with an honorable military history. Then, 6 months ago, my father died. While settling his estate, I found the ledger in a hidden compartment in his desk. He'd known about it. He'd kept it secret. And now it was mine to deal with. Wolfe turned another page in the ledger. Your great-grandfather was methodical. Each entry includes date, location, description of items, estimated value, and disposition, whether sold, kept, or shipped to England. He also notes which items were taken from temples, which from private homes, and which from public buildings. Yes, he was a thief, but an organized one. Ashcroft's laugh was bitter. The most disturbing entries are the ones that mention resistance. There are at least a dozen instances where he notes that occupants were removed, or resistance was discouraged. Those are euphemisms for murder, Mr. Wolfe. My great-grandfather killed people who tried to protect their property. And now someone wants to kill you for exposing these crimes, Wolfe said. Tell me about your research over the past 2 months. Who did you contact? What did you tell them? Ashcroft pulled a notebook from his briefcase and consulted it. I started with Dr. Lakshmi Mehta at the British Museum. She's a curator specializing in colonial-era South Asian artifacts. I showed her the ledger and asked if she could help me identify current locations of the stolen items and possible descendants of the original owners. Her reaction? Shocked, excited. She said the ledger was an unprecedented historical document. Most colonial-era looting wasn't documented at all, and here I had a complete record. She agreed to help and began researching immediately. Wolfe gestured for me to make special note of Dr. Mehta's name. Continue. Next, I contacted Professor Thomas Wycliffe at Oxford. He's an expert on the Sepoy Rebellion and its aftermath. I asked him to help verify the historical context and identify families who might have claims to the stolen property. His reaction? More cautious than Dr. Mehta. He warned me that opening this history could be dangerous, that there are people on both sides who prefer the past remain buried. British families who profited from colonial theft, Indian families who lost everything and carried generational anger. He said I was stirring a pot that had been simmering for a century. Wise advice, which you ignored. I couldn't ignore it. Don't you see, Mr. Wolfe? I'm living in a house built with stolen bricks, eating food purchased with stolen money. Every comfort I've ever known is stained with someone else's suffering. I had to try to make it right. Wolfe regarded him with something that might have been sympathy. Admirable. Foolish, but admirable. Who else? The Indian High Commission in London. I met with a cultural attaché named Rajiv Banerjee. I offered to work with them to repatriate any items that could be located and authenticated. He was very interested, but said it would require careful diplomacy, that I shouldn't publicize my research until they'd had time to assess the legal and political implications. Did you follow his advice? Ashcroft hesitated. Not entirely. I also contacted a journalist, Emma Harrington, at The Guardian. She's written extensively about colonial-era crimes and repatriation efforts. I thought public pressure might help facilitate returns. Wolfe's expression darkened. You told a journalist about a ledger documenting systematic theft and murder before securing the cooperation of governments and institutions. That was remarkably stupid, Mr. Ashcroft. I realize that now. Emma wanted to run a feature story immediately. I asked her to wait until I'd made more progress, but she was insistent. We argued. She said the story was too important to delay. He paused. That was 3 weeks ago. 2 days later, I started receiving threatening letters, and 3 days ago, someone tried to kill me. I stopped writing. Did Emma Harrington run the story? No. I convinced her to hold it. But she'd already begun interviewing people, museum directors, historians, collectors. Word was spreading that I had documentation of colonial-era theft. And everyone you'd contacted, Dr. Mehta, Professor Wycliffe, the Indian High Commission, Emma Harrington, they all knew you had the ledger. Yes. Did anyone ask to examine it directly? Dr. Mehta did. I let her photograph several pages for her research. Professor Wycliffe asked to borrow it, but I refused. The Indian High Commission requested a complete copy, which I provided. He looked miserable. I was trying to be transparent. I thought cooperation would facilitate justice. Wolfe closed the ledger with a soft thump. Instead, you advertised that you possessed documentation of crimes that powerful people would prefer remain forgotten. You made yourself a target for anyone who profits from colonial-era theft remaining hidden, and for anyone seeking violent retribution for historical injustice. He paused. Tell me, Mr. Ashcroft, do any of the items in this ledger remain in your family's possession? A few. Most were sold over the years, but there are perhaps a dozen pieces still in our estate. Some jewelry, a few sculptures, several illustrated manuscripts. Those items alone make you a target. Anyone seeking restitution would start with you, the documented thief's direct descendant, still in possession of stolen property. I'm willing to return everything. I've said so publicly. That may not be enough. For some people, justice means more than restitution. It means punishment. Wolfe reached for the button on his desk. Archie, you will spend this afternoon conducting research. I want complete backgrounds on everyone Mr. Ashcroft contacted. Dr. Mehta, Professor Wycliffe, Rajiv Banerjee at the Indian High Commission, and Emma Harrington. Find out if any of them have personal connections to families who lost property in Agra during 1857. Also determine if any of them have traveled to New York in the past week. Got it. What about museum records? If some of the stolen items ended up in collections, there might be people with financial incentives to keep them hidden. Excellent point. Contact the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Brooklyn Museum. Ask if they have any South Asian artifacts acquired between 1857 and 1880, particularly items with questionable provenance. Be discreet. I made notes. And Ashcroft? You want him at the Hotel Churchill under a false name? Yes. Register him as, Wolfe thought for a moment, Robert Patterson, businessman from Chicago. Pay cash for a week in advance. Instruct him to avoid telephone calls, remain in his room except for meals, and speak to no one about why he's in New York. Ashcroft looked alarmed. You think I'm in immediate danger? I think someone followed you from London, knew you were staying at the Waldorf, and delivered a death threat to your room. Yes, Mr. Ashcroft, you're in immediate danger, but you've hired me to keep you alive and identify your would-be killer. I intend to do both, provided you follow instructions precisely. I will, I promise. Good. Archie will escort you to the hotel. Take nothing from the Waldorf except essential clothing. Assume your room has been searched and possibly compromised. Purchase anything else you need in New York. Wolfe paused. One more question. Did your father know you'd found the ledger before he died? No. He died suddenly. Heart attack. I found the ledger 3 weeks after his funeral. Convenient timing. Ashcroft's face went pale. You think someone killed my father? I think your father kept a dangerous secret for decades without incident. Then he died suddenly, and 3 weeks later you discovered the secret. That sequence merits investigation. Wolfe stood, signaling the interview was over. Go with Archie. Check into the hotel. Stay alive. I will contact you when I have information. After Ashcroft had retrieved his coat and briefcase, I escorted him to the front door. Caesar and Mars flanked us, their presence a reminder that leaving the brownstone meant leaving its security. Mr. Goodwin, Ashcroft said quietly as I helped him into a taxi. Do you think Mr. Wolfe can solve this? Can he find out who's trying to kill me? If anyone can, it's Wolfe. He's solved cases that made this look simple. But here's my advice. The threat is real, so treat it seriously. Don't go sightseeing. Don't chat with hotel staff. And definitely don't contact anyone from your research. You're in hiding now. Act like it. I understand. The taxi pulled away into the grey November afternoon. I watched it disappear around the corner, then returned to the brownstone, where Loyal was waiting just inside the door, his intelligent eyes watching me with what I liked to think was approval. Good boy, I said, and was rewarded with a single thump of his tail against the floor. Back in the office, Wolfe had opened the ledger again and was reading with complete absorption. He'd also opened a bottle of beer and poured it with his usual care. Impressions? He asked without looking up. Ashcroft is genuinely frightened. Whether he's telling us everything is another question, but the fear is real. Agreed. He's also foolish. Approaching so many people with such volatile information was bound to provoke a reaction, but his motives appear genuine. Wolfe turned a page. This ledger is extraordinary, Archie. Your great-grandfather didn't just steal, he documented who he stole from, what he took, and what he did with it. There are names here, families, specific temples. If we cross-reference this with historical records, we could identify dozens of descendants who have legitimate claims, or dozens of suspects who want Ashcroft dead for exposing their ancestors' losses. Precisely. This case involves layers of motive, people who want the ledger destroyed to hide ongoing possession of stolen property, people who want the ledger to prove claims for restitution, and people who want revenge for historical injustice. We must determine which motive drove the assassination attempt. And if it's revenge, someone who just wants Ashcroft dead because of what his great-grandfather did, then we must find them before they succeed. Wolfe closed the ledger. Begin your research. I want complete dossiers on everyone. Ashcroft contacted by this evening. And Archie. Yes? Be careful. If someone is willing to cross an ocean to kill Ashcroft, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way. That includes you. I'll take Loyal with me. Anyone who gets past him deserves to succeed. Wolfe's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Indeed. Go. I headed out into the November afternoon, Loyal trotting beside me, his brick-red coat almost glowing in the grey light. We had work to do, research to conduct, suspects to identify, and a killer to catch before they made Ashcroft the latest casualty in a century-long chain of violence. The Colonial debt was coming due, and someone had decided payment would be in blood. My job was to make sure it wasn't Ashcroft's blood. Or mine. The New York Public Library's main branch on Fifth Avenue was one of my favorite places to conduct research. Massive stone lions flanking the entrance, endless rows of books inside, and librarians who knew how to find anything if you asked the right questions. I'd left Loyal with Fritz at the brownstone. Libraries frowned on even the best-behaved pit bulls, and now I was settled at a table in the research room with a stack of reference books and my notebook. First priority, backgrounds on the 4 people Ashcroft had contacted about the ledger. Dr. Lakshmi Mehta, British Museum curator. The librarian had helped me find several academic journals featuring her articles. She was 43, born in Bombay, now officially Mumbai, though most Americans still use the old name, educated at Cambridge, and employed by the British Museum since 1947. Her specialty was Mughal-era artifacts, particularly items looted during the colonial period. She'd written extensively about the need for repatriation and had been involved in several controversial cases where the museum had been forced to return stolen items to India. Interesting detail. Her great-great-grandfather had been a scholar in Agra who documented the temple lootings during the 1857 rebellion. His journals had been lost, but Dr. Mehta had spent years trying to reconstruct what had been taken. Ashcroft's ledger would be like Christmas morning for her. Complete documentation of exactly what she'd been trying to prove for decades. Professor Thomas Wycliffe, Oxford historian, 72 years old, retired but still publishing, specialist in British military history in India. His published work was more sympathetic to British colonial administration than Dr. Mehta's. He argued that while excesses occurred, the overall British presence had brought stability and progress that made him either a balanced historian or an apologist, depending on who you asked. No obvious personal connection to Agra or the 1857 rebellion, but his family had military ties to India going back generations. His grandfather had served there and his father had been born in Delhi. Worth noting, Rajiv Banerjee, cultural attaché at the Indian High Commission, harder to research. Diplomatic personnel kept lower profiles. but I found a few mentions in newspapers covering repatriation negotiations. He was 51, educated in Delhi and London, career diplomat. His official role was facilitating returns of cultural property to India. He'd been involved in successful negotiations for several major artifacts, and he was known for being patient, methodical, and effective. No obvious personal connection to Agra that I could find in public records, but that didn't mean much. Diplomatic backgrounds were often intentionally obscure. Emma Harrington, Guardian journalist, 38, British, aggressive investigative reporter known for exposing colonial-era crimes and corporate malfeasance. She'd written scathing pieces about British museums holding stolen artifacts, about companies profiting from colonial exploitation, and about aristocratic families whose wealth derived from imperialism. She had a reputation for being fearless, principled, and occasionally reckless. Her great-grandfather had been a missionary in India, who'd been killed during the 1857 rebellion. That was a connection, though I wasn't sure what kind. Revenge for an ancestor's death? Moral crusade to expose historical injustice? I made detailed notes on all four, then moved to the next question. Had any of them traveled to New York recently? That required a different approach. I left the library and headed to the Pan Am building on 45th Street, where I had a contact in the booking office, a woman named Patricia who owed me a favor from a case 2 years ago when I'd helped her brother avoid a fraud charge. "Archie Goodwin," she said when I appeared at her desk. "I figured you'd show up eventually to collect that favor. What do you need?" "Transatlantic flight manifests for the past 2 weeks. I'm looking for 4 specific names." I handed her a list. She glanced at it, then at me. "This is confidential passenger information." "I know. That's why I'm asking you instead of Pan Am's legal department." She sighed. "Give me 10 minutes. 15 minutes later, I had my answer. Emma Harrington had flown from London to New York 6 days ago. She'd booked a round-trip ticket with an open return date. That was interesting. She'd arrived in New York before Ashcroft. That meant either she was here on unrelated business, or she'd known Ashcroft was coming and had beaten him to the city. None of the other 3 names appeared on recent passenger manifests, but that didn't mean they weren't here. They could have traveled under different names, taken ships instead of flights, or sent representatives. I thanked Patricia, promised to take her to lunch sometime, and headed back out into the November cold. Next stop, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Met was having a quiet Friday afternoon. I found my way to the South Asian galleries, where a young curatorial assistant named David was cataloguing acquisitions. "Help you?" he asked, barely looking up from his clipboard. "I'm researching colonial-era artifacts, specifically items that might have been acquired between 1857 and 1880. Anything from the Agra region would be particularly interesting." That got his attention. "Why?" "Client interest. Potential repatriation project." "You a lawyer?" "Private investigator. But I'm working for someone who wants to do the right thing." David considered this, then shrugged. "We've got maybe 24 pieces from that region and period. Most have questionable provenance, purchased from dealers who couldn't or wouldn't document original ownership. Standard for the era. Museums weren't asking hard questions back then." "Can I see the acquisition records?" "Not without proper authorization, but I can tell you generally what we have. Sculptures, manuscripts, decorative objects, some jewelry. Total estimated value may be $400,000 in current market terms. If someone proved those items were stolen, would the museum return them? Depends. If there's clear documentation and legitimate claimants, yes. Museum policy changed in the 40s. We're more open to repatriation now than we used to be. But it requires proof. Family stories aren't enough. We need documentation. What if someone had a ledger documenting exactly what was stolen, from whom, and when?" David's eyes widened. "That would be huge. That would potentially open dozens of repatriation claims. Not just here, but at every major museum. You're saying someone has that?" "I'm saying someone might. And if they did, who would be upset about it? Other than museum directors who don't want to give up prized acquisitions." He thought for a moment. "Collectors who currently own stolen items, dealers who profit from selling them, families who inherited stolen property and don't want to give it up. Take your pick." "What about descendants of original owners? Would they be angry?" "Angry at the thieves, sure. But why would they be angry at someone trying to help them recover what was stolen? Maybe because a century is a long time. Maybe because some people would rather settle accounts with violence than legal proceedings. David looked uncomfortable. That's a dark thought. It's a dark world sometimes. I thanked him and left. By the time I returned to the brownstone, it was nearly 6 o'clock. Wolfe had descended from his afternoon session with the orchids and was in his chair, reading what appeared to be a scholarly article about the Sepoy Rebellion. "Results?" he asked as I entered. I gave him the complete rundown. Dr. Mehta's family connection to Agra, Professor Wycliffe's colonial military heritage, Rajiv Banerjee's diplomatic role, and Emma Harrington's missionary great-grandfather. I also told him about Harrington being in New York 6 days before Ashcroft arrived. Wolfe set down the article. So, the journalist arrived first. That's suggestive. Maybe she's following the story. Maybe she's following Ashcroft. Or maybe she's more involved than he knows. You said they argued about when to publish the story. Ashcroft wanted to wait. Harrington wanted to run it immediately. A journalist impatient for a story is common, but a journalist who travels to New York ahead of her source is curious. Wolfe tapped his fingers on the arm of his chair. Call her hotel, find out where she's staying and what she's been doing. I made the call. Emma Harrington was registered at the Algonquin Hotel on West 44th. Appropriate, since that was where all the literary types stayed. The desk clerk wouldn't tell me much, but a well-placed $20 bill to a bellhop got me more information. She'd been receiving visitors in the lobby, at least 3 different people over the past 4 days. One was described as a well-dressed British gentleman, maybe 60. Another was a younger Indian man in a suit. The third was, couldn't really tell, wore sunglasses and a hat. I reported this to Wolfe. The British gentleman could be Professor Wycliffe. The Indian man could be someone from the High Commission. The third person is anyone's guess. Or all 3 could be unrelated to our case. But I think not. Wolfe reached for his beer. Someone is coordinating. Someone knew Ashcroft had the ledger, knew he was coming to New York, and arranged to be here when he arrived. They delivered a threat to his hotel room, suggesting they knew which room he was in and had access to the building. That level of coordination suggests professional operation, not amateur vengeance. So what's the play? Do we bring in Harrington and ask her directly? Not yet. First, I want more information. Tomorrow you will visit the Algonquin and observe Miss Harrington. See who she meets with, what she discusses. If opportunity presents, engage her in conversation, but do not reveal your connection to Ashcroft or to me. Got it. What about the others? I will have Saul Panzer investigate Dr. Mehta and Professor Wycliffe. If either of them is in New York, Saul will find them. As for Mr. Banerjee at the Indian High Commission, Wolfe paused. That's more delicate. Diplomatic immunity complicates matters. We'll need to approach carefully. Fritz appeared in the doorway. Dinner is ready, gentlemen. Duck with cherry sauce. We moved to the dining room, where Fritz had outdone himself. The duck was perfect. Crispy skin, tender meat, the cherry sauce providing just enough sweetness to balance the richness. For a while, we ate in silence, letting the food do its work. Over coffee, Wolfe returned to the subject. Archie, what's your assessment of Ashcroft's character? Scared, but sincere. He's not lying about wanting to make restitution. Whether he's telling us everything is another question. Agreed. I believe his conscience is genuine. But guilt is a strange motivator. It can lead people to act rashly, to trust the wrong people, to reveal things better kept hidden. Wolfe sipped his coffee. Colonial debt is not a simple matter. It's not like ordinary theft, where you return the stolen property and justice is served. The theft occurred a century ago. The victims are dead. The perpetrators are dead. What remains is inherited wealth built on stolen property and inherited anger over historical injustice. Those inheritances don't resolve easily. So you think someone wants more than just the return of stolen artifacts? I think someone wants blood debt paid in blood. Restitution isn't enough. Justice, in their view, requires punishment. Punishing Ashcroft for his great-grandfather's crimes. Sins of the father, Archie, or in this case, sins of the great-grandfather. It's not rational, but vengeance rarely is. Wolfe set down his cup. Tomorrow, gather information. Be careful, and if you see anything that suggests immediate danger to Ashcroft, call me immediately. Will do. That night, I checked on Ashcroft by telephone. He'd checked into the Hotel Churchill as Robert Patterson had ordered room service for dinner and was staying put as instructed. He sounded anxious, but grateful. "Mr. Goodwin, has Mr. Wolfe made any progress?" "He's working on it. Just stay in your room and stay quiet. We'll figure this out." After hanging up, I made my rounds of the brownstone, checking doors, windows, and dog positions. Caesar and Mars were at the front, Apollo at the rear, Minerva on the second-floor landing, Diana in the basement, and Loyal under my desk as usual. The brownstone was secure. The rain had stopped, and West 35th Street was quiet, except for the occasional taxi passing by. Somewhere out there was a killer, someone who tried once and would try again, someone who believed that colonial debts could only be settled through violence. My job was to find them before they succeeded. I poured myself a drink, sat at my desk, and reviewed my notes. 4 people Ashcroft had contacted. One of them was in New York, probably more than one, and at least one of them wanted him dead. The question was, why? Was it revenge for historical crimes? Protection of stolen property? Something else entirely? Wolfe was right. This wasn't a simple case. It was tangled up in history, in inherited guilt, in competing claims to justice. But murder was murder, regardless of the motive. And I intended to make sure the killer faced justice, the modern legal kind, not the violent vengeance they'd chosen. Loyal stirred under my desk, looked up at me with those intelligent eyes, then settled back to sleep. "Good boy," I said quietly. Tomorrow, we'd start pulling at threads, and sooner or later, something would unravel. I just hoped it wouldn't be Ashcroft's life. Saturday morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of November day that makes New York look almost respectable. I was at the Algonquin Hotel by 9 o'clock, positioned in the lobby with a newspaper and a cup of coffee that was barely drinkable, but served as good cover. The Algonquin was the kind of place where writers, editors, and intellectuals gathered to be seen being intellectual. The lobby had that studied, shabby, genteel atmosphere that suggested old money and older conversations. I dressed accordingly. Decent suit, tie, nothing too flashy, and settled into a chair with a view of both the front entrance and the elevators. Emma Harrington came down at 9:30. I recognized her from a photograph I'd found in a back issue of The Guardian at the library. She was tall, perhaps 5'9", with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp green eyes that suggested she missed nothing. She wore a grey suit that was professional without being stuffy, and she carried a leather notebook under one arm. She went directly to the front desk, spoke briefly with the clerk, then crossed to the hotel restaurant. I gave her 5 minutes, then followed. The restaurant was half full with the breakfast crowd. Harrington had taken a corner table where she could see the entrance. Smart positioning for someone who wanted to control her meetings. I took a table 2 away, angled so I could watch her without being obvious about it. She ordered coffee and toast, then opened her notebook and began writing. Every few minutes she'd glance at her watch, then at the door. She was waiting for someone. At 10 o'clock, a man entered. Mid-50s, well-dressed in a dark suit, carrying a briefcase. He had that particular British look, good schools, good tailoring, the confident bearing of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. He spotted Harrington and approached. They didn't shake hands, just nodded in recognition. He sat down across from her. I couldn't hear their conversation from where I was sitting, but I could watch their body language. Harrington was leaning forward, intense, asking questions. The man was more reserved, occasionally shaking his head, once putting his hands up in a gesture that suggested, "I can't help you with that." They talked for maybe 20 minutes. Then the man pulled something from his briefcase, looked like a manila envelope, and slid it across the table. Harrington opened it, examined the contents briefly, then nodded and tucked it into her own bag. The man stood, said something that might have been farewell, and left without finishing his coffee. Harrington remained at the table, nursing her own coffee and making notes. She looked pleased with herself, the expression of a reporter who'd just gotten a good source to provide useful information. I finished my breakfast, paid my check, and positioned myself in the lobby, where I could watch the elevator without being too obvious about it. 20 minutes later, Harrington came out of the restaurant and headed for the elevator. I waited until she'd gone up, then approached the front desk with my best friendly smile. "Excuse me, I'm supposed to meet my colleague, British gentleman, 50s, dark suit. He was just in the restaurant with a red-haired woman." Did he leave a message for me? The clerk glanced at the restaurant. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't see anyone leave a message. But if you'd like to wait... No, that's fine. I must have gotten the time wrong. Thanks anyway. I left the hotel and positioned myself across the street, where I had a clear view of the entrance. If Harrington had more meetings scheduled, I wanted to see who showed up. At 11:15, a younger man arrived, maybe 35, South Asian, wearing an expensive suit and carrying himself with the kind of careful dignity that suggested diplomatic training. He entered the hotel. I gave him 5 minutes, then called the brownstone from a payphone. Fritz answered. Good morning, Archie. Morning, Fritz. Is he available? One moment. Wolfe came on the line, sounding irritated at being disturbed. Yes. Harrington had a meeting at 10 with a well-dressed British man, 50s. He gave her an envelope. Now a younger South Asian man just entered the hotel. Looks like diplomatic corps. Could be someone from the Indian High Commission. Description of the British man. I provided details. Wolfe was silent for a moment. That matches Professor Wycliffe, based on photographs in his published books. So, the professor is in New York, meeting secretly with a journalist who's supposed to be waiting to publish a story. Interesting. You want me to confront her? Not yet. Observe the second meeting if possible. See if you can determine what they're discussing. Will do. I returned to my observation post across the street. 45 minutes later, the South Asian man emerged from the hotel, alone. He walked east on 44th Street toward 5th Avenue. I followed at a discreet distance. He walked like a man who knew he might be followed, checking reflections in windows, pausing occasionally to adjust his tie while scanning the street behind him. Professional counter-surveillance, which meant he either had training or experience or both. At 5th Avenue, he turned south and walked 2 blocks to the Indian Consulate at 3 East 64th Street. He entered through the main entrance, nodding to the security guard like someone who belonged there. So, diplomatic personnel, almost certainly. Whether he was Rajiv Banerjee or someone else from the Cultural Office, I couldn't tell from outside. I found another payphone and called the brownstone again. Wolfe? The second man went straight to the Indian Consulate. Diplomatic personnel, no question. He's got counter-surveillance training, checked for tails twice on the walk. Then he's more than a low-level clerk. Probably Banerjee himself, or someone similar. Wolfe paused. So, Professor Wycliffe and someone from the Indian Consulate are both meeting privately with Emma Harrington. That suggests coordination. Return to the Algonquin and see if Miss Harrington has any additional appointments. And if she does, observe them all. I want to know everyone in this conspiracy before we make our move. I returned to the Algonquin, but Harrington didn't emerge again until nearly 2 o'clock. When she did, she was alone and carrying her leather bag. She walked west on 44th Street, turned north on 6th Avenue, and entered the New York Public Library. I followed her inside. She went directly to the research room, the same one I'd used the day before, and requested files on British military history in India, 1850. I positioned myself at a nearby table with a book on New York architecture. Boring, but it gave me an excuse to be there, and watched. Harrington was methodical. She went through file after file, making detailed notes, occasionally photographing pages with a small camera she'd pulled from her bag. She was researching something specific, not just gathering background, but hunting for particular information. After 2 hours, she requested a different set of files, British military personnel records, Agra region, 1856. She was researching Colonel Sir Reginald Ashcroft. That made sense for a journalist writing about the ledger, but why was she doing it secretly, after meeting with Wycliffe and someone from the Indian Consulate? Why not work openly with Ashcroft, who had the primary source material, unless she was working against him? At 4:30, Harrington gathered her materials, returned them to the desk, and left the library. I followed her back to the Algonquin, where she went directly to her room. I called Wolfe from a payphone in the lobby. She spent 2 hours researching British military records for Agra, 1856 to 1858, specifically looking into Colonel Ashcroft's service. She's got photographs of documents, detailed notes. She's building a case for something. For a story, presumably. But what kind of story? Wolfe's voice was thoughtful. A journalist investigating colonial-era crimes would normally work with someone like Ashcroft, who has direct evidence. Instead, she's meeting secretly with academics and diplomats and conducting independent research. That suggests her goals differ from Ashcroft's. Maybe she doesn't trust him. Maybe she thinks he's hiding something. Or maybe she's planning something that requires his absence. Return to the brownstone, Archie. I want to review what we know before deciding next steps. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office with Saul Panzer. Saul was the best freelance operative in New York. Small, unassuming, and absolutely brilliant at surveillance. If Wolfe had called him in, things were getting serious. Archie, Wolfe said by way of greeting. Saul has been investigating Dr. Lakshmi Mehta. Saul? Saul consulted his notebook. Dr. Mehta arrived in New York 4 days ago. She's staying at the Lexington Hotel on 48th Street. She spent most of her time at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, examining their South Asian collection. Yesterday afternoon, she had lunch with Emma Harrington at a restaurant near the museum. They talked for 2 hours. I sat down. So Mehta and Harrington know each other. That's not mentioned in Ashcroft's account. It's possible he doesn't know, Wolfe said. Or possible he failed to mention it. Either way, it's significant. We now have 3 of the 4 people Ashcroft contacted, Mehta, Wycliffe, and presumably Banerjee, all in New York, all meeting with the same journalist. That's not coincidence. What about Wycliffe? I asked Saul. Arrived 6 days ago, staying at the Harvard Club on West 44th. He's been to the library twice, met with Harrington twice that I observed, and had dinner last night with Dr. Mehta at an Indian restaurant in Midtown. Wolfe's fingers drummed on his desk. So, all 4 of Ashcroft's contacts are in New York. They're meeting privately, conducting research, and coordinating their activities. The question is, what are they planning? Maybe they're planning to publish the story without Ashcroft's cooperation. I suggested, take the information he gave them and run with it. Possible, but that doesn't explain the assassination attempt in London or the death threat at the Waldorf. Wolfe reached for his beer. No, this is something more complex. They want something from Ashcroft, either his cooperation, his silence, or his death. We need to determine which. Saul cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Last night I followed Dr. Mehta from her hotel. She took a taxi to an address in Brooklyn, a private home in Park Slope. She was inside for about an hour, then returned to her hotel. This morning I checked the address. It's owned by a family named Prasad, immigrant family from India, been in New York since 1948. Prasad, Wolfe repeated. Archie, check Ashcroft's ledger. See if that name appears. I retrieved the ledger from the safe where Wolfe had locked it and began scanning the entries. It took 10 minutes, but I found it. March 15th, 1858. Private residence. Agra cantonment. Owner, Prasad family. Merchants. Seized, jewelry, gold, rubies, emeralds. Estimated value £380. 4 decorative brass plates. Temple origin. 1 illuminated manuscript, Sanskrit. Value unknown. Occupants removed by force when resistance encountered. Occupants removed by force, I read aloud. That's Ashcroft's euphemism for murder. He killed members of the Prasad family and stole their property. And now, nearly a century later, Dr. Mehta is visiting their descendants in Brooklyn. Wolfe's expression was grim. Saul, I want surveillance on that Brooklyn address. Find out who lives there, what they do, and whether they've made any recent trips to London. You think they tried to kill Ashcroft? I think they have motive. Their ancestors were murdered and robbed by his great-grandfather. If anyone would seek violent justice, it would be them. After Saul left to begin surveillance, Wolfe and I sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the November twilight was settling over West 35th Street. Inside, the dogs were taking up their evening positions. Caesar and Mars at the front, Apollo at the rear, Minerva on the stairs, Diana in the basement, Loyal under my desk. This is getting complicated, I said finally. It was always complicated. We're simply beginning to see the shape of the complications. Wolfe opened the ledger again, turning pages slowly. Ashcroft's great-grandfather killed at least 12 people according to these entries. 12 people who resisted or interfered or required removal. That's 12 families with potential grievances. Any one of them could have descendants in New York seeking vengeance. But why now? Why wait 98 years? Because until Ashcroft found the ledger and began publicizing his research, Most descendants probably didn't know the specific details of what was stolen or who did the stealing. Colonial-era records are incomplete. Family stories fade. But now Ashcroft has provided documentation, proof of theft, proof of murder, proof of which families were victimized. He's handed those descendants the evidence they'd need to pursue either legal claims or violent revenge. So by trying to do the right thing, he's made himself a target. Yes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and Ashcroft's intentions, however noble, have unleashed something he can't control. Wolfe closed the ledger. We need to speak with him. Tomorrow morning, bring him here. I want to question him more thoroughly about his research and determine what he might have revealed inadvertently. You think he's holding back information? I think he's a guilty man trying to atone for inherited sin. Such men often don't think clearly. They reveal things to people they shouldn't trust. They make promises they can't keep, and they put themselves in danger because they believe they deserve punishment. Wolfe's eyes met mine. We need to ensure his guilty conscience doesn't get him killed. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin residence. Mr. Goodwin? It was Ashcroft, his voice tight with panic. Someone just tried to break into my hotel room. They were at the door trying the lock. I shouted that I was calling the police, and they ran. But they know where I am. They found me. Stay in your room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Mr. Wolfe. I'm coming now. I hung up and grabbed my coat. Someone just tried Ashcroft's room at the Churchill. They found him. Wolfe's face darkened. Take Saul if you can reach him. And Archie, be armed. If they're willing to make a second attempt this quickly, they're desperate. I checked my .38, made sure it was loaded, and headed for the door. Loyal stood as if to follow. But I shook my head. Stay, boy. Guard the fort. His tail dropped in disappointment, but he sat back down. Outside, the evening had turned cold. I flagged a taxi and gave the driver the Hotel Churchill's address, then added, $20 if you get there in under 10 minutes. He got there in 8. The Churchill was a mid-range hotel, respectable but not fancy. I took the stairs 2 at a time to the 4th floor, where Ashcroft's room was located at the end of a hallway. His door was closed and showed scratches around the lock. Someone had definitely tried to force entry. I knocked quietly. Ashcroft. It's Goodwin. Open up. The lock clicked. The door opened 6 inches with the chain still engaged, and Ashcroft's pale face appeared in the gap. Thank God. I thought they'd come back. Let me in. He released the chain and I entered quickly, closing and locking the door behind me. The room was standard hotel issue: bed, desk, chair, bathroom. Ashcroft had been working at the desk when the attempt occurred. Papers were scattered across it, and his briefcase was open. Tell me exactly what happened. I was reviewing my notes. It was about 6:15. I heard someone at the door, not knocking, but working on the lock. Metal scraping metal. I realized what was happening and shouted that I was calling the police. The noise stopped immediately, and I heard footsteps running down the hallway. Did you see anyone? No. I looked through the peephole after they'd gone, but the hallway was empty. And you registered under the name Robert Patterson? Yes, just as you instructed. Then either someone followed you from the Waldorf, or someone on the hotel staff told them where you were. Either way, you're compromised. I looked around the room. Pack your things. You're coming back to the brownstone. Is that safe? Safer than here. The brownstone has bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, and 6 guard dogs. If anyone tries to get to you there, they'll have to go through a lot of obstacles first. He packed quickly, just clothes and papers into his briefcase. I checked the hallway, saw it was clear, and escorted him down the back stairs and out a side exit. We caught a taxi 2 blocks away. During the ride back to West 35th Street, I studied Ashcroft carefully. He was genuinely frightened, hands shaking, face pale, eyes darting to every car that passed. But there was something else too. Guilt, maybe. Or shame. Mr. Ashcroft, I said quietly, is there anything you haven't told us? Anyone else you contacted about the ledger? Any detail you left out? He was silent for a long moment. Then, there was one other person. I didn't mention him because I wasn't sure it mattered. Tell me now. A collector named Marcus Fairfax. He deals in colonial-era artifacts, South Asian primarily. He contacted me 6 weeks ago. After word began spreading that I had documentation of looted items, he offered to purchase the ledger from me for £50,000. I stared at him. "And you said?" I refused, of course. I told him the ledger wasn't for sale, that I intended to use it for restitution, not profit. He was displeased. He suggested I was making a mistake, that some historical matters were better left alone. I thought he was just being dramatic. Ashcroft's voice dropped, but now I wonder if he was threatening me. You wonder? He all but told you to keep quiet or face consequences, and you didn't think to mention this to Mr. Wolfe?
I didn't think a collector would resort to murder. I thought he was just upset about losing a potential acquisition.
Collectors murder for rare items all the time, Mr. Ashcroft. It's one of the oldest motives in the world. I pulled out my notebook. Where's Fairfax based? London. He has a gallery in Mayfair, but I heard he travels frequently, buying trips to India, sales trips to America. Is he in New York? I don't know. I haven't heard from him since I refused his offer. We rode the rest of the way in silence. When we reached the brownstone, Fritz had the door open before we reached the top step. He'd been watching for us. Caesar and Mars examined Ashcroft with renewed interest, as if recognizing that his status had changed from visitor to resident. Wolfe was in the office, a fresh bottle of beer open. He listened to my account of the attempted break-in without interruption. When I mentioned Marcus Fairfax, his expression turned cold. "Mr. Ashcroft," Wolfe said quietly, "when I accepted your case, I told you that lying, even by omission, would result in immediate termination of our arrangement. You failed to mention a collector who offered to purchase the ledger and threatened you when you refused. That's a material omission." "I'm sorry. You didn't think it was relevant that someone offered you £50,000 for a ledger documenting theft and murder, then threatened you when you refused. Your judgment is extraordinarily poor, sir." Ashcroft looked miserable. "You're right. I should have told you. I was focused on the people who wanted to help return the artifacts, not the people who wanted to profit from them. Those are not separate categories. Some people want to help because they profit from appearing righteous. Others want to suppress your research because they profit from continued possession of stolen property. Mr. Fairfax clearly falls into the latter category." Wolfe reached for his button. "Fritz, prepare the guest room. Mr. Ashcroft will be staying here until this matter is resolved. And Fritz, ensure the dogs are on highest alert. We have at least one killer actively pursuing our client, and possibly more." After Fritz had shown Ashcroft upstairs, Wolfe looked at me. "Archie, first thing tomorrow morning, you will research Marcus Fairfax. I want to know everything, his business practices, his collection, his current whereabouts, and whether he has a history of violence. Also determine if he's in New York. You think he's the one who tried to kill Ashcroft in London? I think he's a man who profits from colonial theft and has strong incentive to prevent exposure. Whether that makes him a killer or merely an interested party remains to be determined." Wolfe picked up the ledger. "We now have two distinct groups of actors, those seeking justice or restitution for historical crimes, and those seeking to hide or profit from those same crimes. Both groups have reason to want Ashcroft silenced, one through violence, one through intimidation or purchase. We must determine which poses the immediate threat." "What about the Prasad family? Saul's watching them." "Yes, they have the strongest motive for revenge. Their ancestors were murdered by Ashcroft's great-grandfather. But vengeance and attempted murder are different things. We need evidence, not just motive." The phone rang. I answered. "Archie, it's Saul. I've been watching the Prasad residence. At 7 o'clock, a young man, maybe 25, left the house and took a subway to Manhattan. I followed him to the Hotel Churchill. He walked past the main entrance twice, checking the street, then entered through a side door. He came out 15 minutes later and took the subway back to Brooklyn." I relayed this to Wolfe. His expression hardened. "So, a member of the Prasad family was at the Churchill shortly after the attempted break-in. That's more than coincidence, Archie. That's evidence. You want me to bring him in?" "No, I want Saul to continue surveillance. If the Prasads are planning another attempt, we need to know when and how. Meanwhile, we'll keep Ashcroft here where he's protected." Wolfe stood, signaling the evening was over. "Tomorrow we begin applying pressure. We'll see who breaks first, those seeking vengeance or those seeking profit. Either way, we'll have our killer." I called Saul back and told him to maintain surveillance on the Prasad house overnight. Then I made my final rounds, checking doors, windows, and dogs. Caesar and Mars were positioned at the front, absolutely still except for the occasional twitch of an ear. Apollo was at the rear entrance, alert and ready. Minerva watched from the second-floor landing, and Diana prowled the basement with silent efficiency. Loyal had returned to his position under my desk, his eyes reflecting the lamplight. Somewhere out there, multiple people wanted James Ashcroft dead for revenge, for profit, or for reasons we hadn't yet discovered. But tonight, he was safe. He was inside a fortress, guarded by professionals, human and canine, protected by bulletproof glass and reinforced doors. Tomorrow, we'd start forcing the issue. We'd bring in the suspects, apply pressure, and see who cracked. Because one thing was certain, the Colonial debt was coming due, and we were about to collect. Sunday morning brought Inspector Kramer to our door at 9 o'clock, looking like he hadn't slept and wasn't happy about being awake. Fritz admitted him with his usual courtesy, but Caesar and Mars made their professional assessment. Kramer had been to the brownstone often enough that they recognized him, but they never fully relaxed around police. Smart dogs. I showed him into the office, where Wolfe was reading the Sunday Times with his first coffee of the day. Wolfe looked up with mild annoyance. Sunday mornings were sacred, reserved for newspapers, orchids, and the absence of complications. "Inspector, this is unexpected." "Yeah, well, murder investigations don't take weekends off." Kramer dropped into the red leather chair without waiting for an invitation. "James Ashcroft, British citizen, staying at the Hotel Churchill under the name Robert Patterson. You know him?" Wolfe and I exchanged glances. "He's my client. Why do you ask?" "Because 2 hours ago, a man matching his description was attacked in Central Park. Victim survived, barely. He's at Mount Sinai Hospital now, unconscious. No identification on him, but the hotel key in his pocket led us to the Churchill, and the desk clerk identified him as Robert Patterson. Except Robert Patterson doesn't exist, and the real guest was British with an accent." Kramer pulled out his cigar and bit down on it. "So I'm asking, is your client lying unconscious in a hospital, or is someone else using his hotel room?" My stomach went cold. "What time was the attack?" "Approximately 7:30 this morning. Victim was jogging in the park near the reservoir. Attacker came up behind him, tried to strangle him with a cord. Victim fought back, made enough noise to attract attention. Attacker fled before finishing the job." "Ashcroft's upstairs in our guest room," I said. "He's been here since last night. Someone tried to break into his hotel room yesterday evening, so we brought him here for protection." Kramer's expression shifted from suspicion to grim understanding. "So somebody attacked someone else, thinking it was Ashcroft?" "Apparently." "Who's the victim?" "We don't know. But if he was in Ashcroft's hotel room, he either broke in or was given access by someone." I stood. "I'll check if Ashcroft is awake and can help identify who might have been in that room." I went upstairs and knocked on the guest room door. Ashcroft answered, looking rumpled and exhausted. "Mr. Goodwin, is something wrong?" "Someone was attacked in Central Park this morning. They were staying in your hotel room at the Churchill. Any idea who that might be?" His face went pale. "Oh God, Professor Wycliffe. He called me yesterday evening, said he wanted to meet privately to discuss my research. I told him I'd left the Waldorf, but didn't give him the new location. He must have tracked me somehow and gone to the Churchill." "Why would he be in your room?" "I don't know. Perhaps he was waiting for me. Perhaps he thought I'd return." Ashcroft sat down heavily on the bed. "Is he?" "Barely. He's at Mount Sinai Hospital, unconscious." I studied him carefully. "Why would Professor Wycliffe want to meet with you privately? You said he warned you about stirring up the past." "He did. But yesterday he called and said he'd learned something important, something about who might be threatening me. He wanted to share it in person, without others listening." Ashcroft looked miserable. "I should have told you. I should have told Mr. Wolfe. But I thought if I could resolve this without causing more trouble." "Your instinct to handle things yourself is going to get people killed." I gestured toward the door. "Get dressed. Inspector Kramer wants to ask you questions." Downstairs, Ashcroft repeated his story for Kramer. The professor had called asking for a private meeting. Ashcroft had declined to provide his location, and Wycliffe must have tracked him to the Churchill somehow. "How would he track you?" Kramer asked. "I don't know. Perhaps he followed me from the Waldorf." Perhaps someone at the hotel told him. Perhaps. Ashcroft stopped. Emma Harrington. She's a journalist. She has sources everywhere. If Wycliffe asked her to help find me... You think Harrington helped Wycliffe find you? I asked. They know each other. They're both in New York researching the same story. It's possible. Wolfe had been listening in silence. Now he spoke. Inspector, did the attacker leave any evidence? A silk cord dropped at the scene when the victim started screaming. We're having it analyzed, but it's not common. Looks like authentic Indian silk, hand-braided. Traditional method. Traditional Indian assassination technique, Wolfe said. Also the same method used in the London attempt on Mr. Ashcroft. So we're looking for someone with knowledge of Indian culture and a willingness to kill. Kramer stood. I need you to come to the hospital, Ashcroft. Maybe Wycliffe will wake up and be able to identify his attacker. Maybe you can provide context that helps. I'll go with them, I said to Wolfe. He nodded. Archie, after the hospital, visit Emma Harrington at the Algonquin. Ask her directly about Professor Wycliffe and whether she helped him locate Mr. Ashcroft. Her answer will tell us whether she's merely a journalist pursuing a story or an active participant in this conspiracy. And if she's part of it, then we'll need to determine whose side she's on. Those seeking justice or those seeking to hide crimes. Wolfe picked up his newspaper. Be careful. Whoever attacked Professor Wycliffe is still at large and clearly willing to kill. Don't give them another opportunity. Mount Sinai Hospital smelled like all hospitals. Antiseptic, illness and fear. Kramer led us to the intensive care ward, where Professor Wycliffe was in a private room under police guard. The professor looked bad. His face was bruised. There were dark ligature marks around his neck, and he was hooked up to more machines than seemed necessary for one person. A doctor was checking his vital signs. How is he? Kramer asked. Stable, but unconscious. The strangulation caused oxygen deprivation to the brain. We won't know the extent of damage until he wakes up. If he wakes up, the doctor checked his chart. He's strong for his age, though. If he makes it through the next 24 hours, his chances improve significantly. We waited for an hour, but Wycliffe didn't wake. Finally, Kramer sent us home with instructions to call if we thought of anything useful. In the taxi back to the brownstone, Ashcroft sat hunched and miserable. This is my fault. If I hadn't found that ledger, if I hadn't tried to make amends, none of this would be happening. If you hadn't found it, your great-grandfather's crimes would remain hidden, and the families he victimized would have no chance at justice, I said. That wouldn't be better. It would just be easier. Easy and right aren't always the same thing. No, but that doesn't mean doing the right thing is wrong, even when it's hard. We dropped Ashcroft at the brownstone. Fritz met him at the door and escorted him to the guest room, and I continued to the Algonquin Hotel. Emma Harrington was in the lobby, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. I approached directly. Miss Harrington, Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. I need to ask you some questions about James Ashcroft and Professor Thomas Wycliffe. She looked up, her green eyes sharp and assessing. I know who you are, Mr. Goodwin. I've been expecting someone from Wolfe's office to contact me. Shall we talk here, or would you prefer somewhere more private? Here's fine. She gestured to the chair across from her. Ask your questions. Did you help Professor Wycliffe locate James Ashcroft yesterday? Yes. Thomas called me and said he needed to speak with James urgently, that he'd learned something about who was threatening him. He asked if I knew where James was staying. I made some calls, found out he'd checked into the Churchill under a false name, and passed that information to Thomas. Just like that? You didn't think it was suspicious that Ashcroft was hiding under a false name? I thought he was being paranoid. I didn't think he was in actual danger. Her expression hardened. I heard about the attack this morning. Is Thomas going to survive? Doctors don't know yet. He's unconscious. She closed her eyes briefly. God, I led Thomas right into an ambush. Or you set him up deliberately. Her eyes snapped open. I beg your pardon? You've been meeting with Professor Wycliffe, Dr. Lakshmi Mehta, and someone from the Indian consulate. You're all in New York at the same time, all researching the same story, all conducting private meetings. That's not journalism. That's coordination. So I'm asking, what are you really doing here? She studied me for a long moment. Then she set down her coffee cup and leaned forward. Mr. Goodwin, I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to take it back to Nero Wolfe Then he's going to decide whether I'm an enemy or an ally. I'm listening. 6 weeks ago, James Ashcroft contacted me about a ledger documenting colonial-era theft in India. He wanted help publicizing it, facilitating returns, making amends. I agreed because I've spent my career exposing exactly this kind of historical crime. But when I started researching, I discovered something James either doesn't know or hasn't told you. His great-grandfather's ledger is only part of the story. What's the rest? There were 6 other British officers involved in the Agra lootings, 6 men who worked with Colonel Ashcroft, who participated in the thefts and murders, who profited alongside him. Some of them also kept records, and some of their descendants are still in possession of stolen property, still profiting from colonial crimes, and still very motivated to prevent exposure. Including Marcus Fairfax? She looked surprised. You know about Fairfax? Ashcroft mentioned him. Collector who offered to buy the ledger. Fairfax is more than a collector. His great-grandfather was Captain Henry Fairfax, one of the 6 officers who worked with Colonel Ashcroft. The Fairfax family fortune is built on stolen Indian artifacts, items they've been selling quietly for 3 generations through their gallery in Mayfair. If James's ledger becomes public, it doesn't just expose Colonel Ashcroft's crimes, it exposes the Fairfax family and potentially 4 other British families who've been hiding their colonial legacies. I absorbed this. So Fairfax doesn't just want to buy the ledger, he wants to destroy it. Exactly, and he's willing to kill to protect his family's secrets. She paused. I don't know if Fairfax is the one who attacked Thomas this morning, but I know he's in New York. I saw him 2 days ago coming out of a rare bookshop on Madison Avenue, and I know he's dangerous. Why didn't you warn Ashcroft? I tried. I called him yesterday, but he wouldn't talk to me. He said Nero Wolfe told him not to contact anyone from his research, so I called Thomas instead, told him what I'd learned about Fairfax, and asked him to warn James. Thomas said he'd handle it. Her voice cracked slightly. I thought he'd just call James, talk to him by phone. I didn't think he'd go to his hotel in person, and I certainly didn't think someone would attack him. Who else knows about the other 5 families? Dr. Mehta. She's been researching colonial theft for years. She recognized the names when I mentioned them. Professor Wycliffe knew. He's a military historian, and he documented some of the officers' activities in his published work. And Rajiv Banerjee at the Indian consulate knows, because I told him. The Indian government wants the ledger and all related records, so they can pursue formal repatriation claims against all 6 families. What about descendants of the victims? The Indian families who lost property and loved ones? That's more complicated. Dr. Mehta has been quietly contacting them, trying to build a coalition for legal action. But some of them don't want legal action. They want revenge. The Prasad family in Brooklyn? She nodded, among others. Mehta visited them, told them about the ledger, showed them the specific entry documenting what was stolen from their ancestors. They were not receptive to the idea of peaceful restitution. Did they threaten violence? Not explicitly, but the anger was obvious. Generational anger, Mr. Goodwin, the kind that doesn't go away just because a guilty descendant offers apologies and returns a few artifacts. I stood. Miss Harrington, I'm going to ask you to come with me to speak with Mr. Wolfe. He'll want to hear all of this directly. I'm happy to cooperate. But Mr. Goodwin, you should know that I'm planning to publish this story within the next 72 hours, with or without James Ashcroft's cooperation, with or without Nero Wolfe's blessing. This is too important to suppress any longer. 6 British families have been profiting from theft and murder for nearly a century. That ends now, even if publishing gets people killed. People are already being killed. Thomas is in a hospital bed because someone wants to silence this story. Publishing might actually protect people once it's public. There's no point in killing anyone to keep secrets that are no longer secret. Or it might provoke more violence from families seeking revenge. Then we deal with that violence through law enforcement and justice systems. But we don't keep quiet to avoid upsetting murderers and thieves. Her expression was fierce. I'm a journalist, Mr. Goodwin. My job is to expose truth, not suppress it for convenience. We took a taxi back to the brownstone. Emma Harrington spent the ride making notes in her leather notebook, occasionally glancing out the window as if checking for followers. She had good instincts. I'd been checking too, and I was pretty sure a dark sedan had been behind us for the past 10 blocks. When we reached West 35th Street, I had the taxi drop us a block away. We walked the rest of the distance, and the dark sedan drove past without stopping. Maybe it had been following us. Maybe not. Either way, I was taking no chances. Fritz met us at the door, and Caesar gave Harrington a thorough examination before deciding she was acceptable. She looked at the Doberman with appreciation. Impressive security. We have 5 more where he came from, I said. Plus a pit bull who walked 200 miles to bring a killer to justice. We take protection seriously. In the office, Wolfe had finished his newspaper and was working on his second beer of the morning. He assessed Harrington with the same focused attention he'd given Ashcroft, then gestured to the red leather chair. Miss Harrington, Mr. Goodwin has told me about your work. Please explain what you're doing in New York and why I should trust you. She did, repeating everything she'd told me about the 6 British families, their colonial-era crimes, and the current threats against Ashcroft. Wolfe listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a pad. When she finished, he set down his pen. So, 6 families profiting from century-old theft, multiple descendants seeking either justice or revenge, a collector willing to kill to protect family secrets, and you, a journalist determined to expose all of it regardless of consequences. That's the situation. And Professor Wycliffe, what was his role in this constellation of actors? Thomas wanted the truth exposed. He believed historical crimes should be acknowledged, but he also wanted it done carefully, through proper channels. He was trying to moderate between the aggressive approach I favored and the cautious approach Rajiv Banerjee wanted. Her voice dropped. He was a good man, Mr. Wolfe. He didn't deserve to be attacked because he tried to warn James about Fairfax. No one deserves to be attacked, but good intentions don't provide protection against violent men. Wolfe picked up his beer. Miss Harrington, I will ask you the same thing I asked Mr. Ashcroft. Complete honesty. If you lie to me, even by omission, I will withdraw my cooperation immediately. Do you understand? I do. Then tell me, did you help arrange the attack on Professor Wycliffe? No, of course not. I gave Thomas James's location, because he asked, and because I thought he was trying to help. She leaned forward. Mr. Wolfe, I'm many things, but I'm not a murderer. I expose criminals. I don't become one. Noted. And the Prasad family? Did you encourage them to pursue violent revenge? I didn't encourage anything. Dr. Mehta contacted them as part of building a coalition for legal claims. What they choose to do with the information is their decision. Convenient moral distinction. It's the only moral distinction that matters. I provide information. I don't control what people do with it. Wolfe regarded her in silence for a long moment. Then he turned to me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we have information about the attack on Professor Wycliffe. Specifically, that Marcus Fairfax should be considered a primary suspect. Also tell him that the Prasad family in Brooklyn may be planning additional violence and should be questioned immediately. I made the call. Kramer listened, swore creatively, and promised to send detectives to both locations within the hour. After I hung up, Wolfe addressed Harrington again. You said you're publishing within 72 hours. I assume that means you've already written the story. Most of it. I'm waiting on final verification of some details. Show me. She hesitated, then pulled several typed pages from her leather bag and handed them across the desk. Wolfe read them carefully, his expression growing increasingly grim. This is explosive, he said finally. 6 families named, specific crimes documented, current holdings identified. If you publish this, you'll destroy multiple reputations and possibly trigger legal actions across 2 continents. That's the idea. You'll also make yourself a target. Everyone you've named will have reason to want you silenced. I've faced threats before. I can handle it. Can you? Wolfe set down the pages. Miss Harrington, you're brave but foolish. Exposing historical crimes is admirable. Getting yourself killed in the process helps no one. Then help me stay alive while I finish the job. She met his eyes directly. I need 48 hours, Mr. Wolfe. 48 hours to finalize the story, send it to my editors, and ensure it gets published even if something happens to me. Can you provide that? Can you keep me alive long enough to finish what I started? Wolfe looked at me. I knew what he was thinking. Taking on another client meant doubling our responsibilities, doubling our exposure, and possibly doubling our enemies. But it also meant we'd have control over what Harrington published and when. And it meant we could use her story as leverage to force the guilty parties into revealing themselves. We can, I said, but it'll cost you. How much? Nothing. But you'll agree to coordinate with us before publication. We'll tell you when it's safe to release the story, when we've identified the immediate threats and neutralized them. You publish too early, and you'll get more people killed, possibly including yourself. She considered this. And if you decide it's never safe to publish? Then we negotiate. But Miss Harrington, Nero Wolfe doesn't suppress truth. He reveals it. The question is whether we reveal it in a way that brings justice, or in a way that triggers more violence. Work with us, and we'll make sure it's the former. She extended her hand. Deal. I shook it. Her grip was firm. Wolfe reached for his button. Fritz, prepare lunch for 4. Miss Harrington and Mr. Ashcroft will be joining us. Archie, call Saul and have him report on his surveillance of the Prasad family. And call Inspector Kramer back. Tell him we'll need police protection for both Mr. Ashcroft and Miss Harrington, until this matter is resolved. You really think they're both in danger? Harrington asked. I think you've both made yourselves targets by exposing historical crimes. The difference is that Mr. Ashcroft is hiding in my brownstone with 6 guard dogs and bulletproof windows. You've been staying at a hotel with minimal security. Wolfe's expression was stern. Pack your belongings, Miss Harrington. You're moving into our guest room as well. I will not have a second client attacked because they were inadequately protected. She smiled slightly. Most men don't invite women to move in this quickly. Most men aren't responsible for keeping journalists alive while they expose century-old conspiracies. Pack your bags, Miss Harrington. The brownstone has room, and right now, it's the safest place in New York for anyone associated with this case. As Harrington left to collect her things from the Algonquin, I turned to Wolfe. You realize we're now housing 2 clients, both of whom are targets for multiple killers. Yes, which means the killers will have to come here if they want to complete their work. And when they do, his eyes glinted, we'll be waiting. With 6 dogs, bulletproof windows, and me. Precisely. Let them come, Archie. Let them test our defenses. We'll show them that some fortresses cannot be breached, and some debts cannot be collected through violence. I hoped he was right. Because based on what we'd learned, at least 3 parties wanted our clients dead. Marcus Fairfax and his fellow descendants of colonial thieves, the Prasad family, and other victims' descendants seeking revenge, and possibly others we hadn't identified yet. That was a lot of potential killers for 6 dogs and 1 detective to handle. But if anyone could manage it, it was Nero Wolfe. And if he needed help, he had me, Fritz, Saul, and 6 of the most professional guard dogs in Manhattan. The colonial debt was coming due, and we were about to ensure it was paid in justice, not blood. By Monday morning, the brownstone had become something between a fortress and a boarding house. James Ashcroft occupied the main guest room on the 3rd floor. Emma Harrington had taken the smaller guest room on the 2nd floor. Fritz was managing meals for 5 people instead of 2, and the dogs were working overtime maintaining security on a residence that now housed 2 clients with multiple people trying to kill them. I was at my desk reviewing Saul Panzer's overnight surveillance report when the phone rang at 9:15. Goodwin residence. Mr. Goodwin, this is Marcus Fairfax. I believe we should meet. I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Wolfe, who'd just settled into his chair with the morning paper. Marcus Fairfax. He wants to meet. Wolfe set down the paper immediately. Put him on the speaker. I pressed the button that activated the speaker Fritz had installed last year, one of Wolfe's few concessions to modern technology. Mr. Fairfax, you're on speaker with Nero Wolfe. What do you want? Mr. Wolfe, I've heard a great deal about you. The voice was cultured, British, and carried the particular arrogance of someone accustomed to getting what they wanted. I understand James Ashcroft has retained your services. That's correct. Then I'd like to make you a counteroffer. I'm prepared to pay $50,000 American for you to withdraw from the case and turn Mr. Ashcroft and his ledger over to me. Wolfe's expression didn't change. You wish to purchase my betrayal of a client. The answer is no. I'm not asking you to betray anyone. I'm asking you to recognize that this matter is far more complex than Mr. Ashcroft has led you to believe. The ledger he possesses documents crimes committed a century ago by men who are long dead. Exposing those crimes now serves no purpose except to damage innocent descendants and trigger legal battles that will accomplish nothing. Interesting definition of innocent, I said, particularly coming from someone whose family fortune is built on stolen property. There was a pause. I see Mr. Ashcroft has been sharing family histories. How indiscreet of him. You knew Colonel Ashcroft in India. Your great-grandfather was Captain Henry Fairfax, one of the 6 officers who participated in the Agra lootings. Your gallery in Mayfair has been selling stolen artifacts for 3 generations. That's not history, Mr. Fairfax. That's ongoing criminal enterprise. Alleged stolen artifacts, provenance from the colonial era, is notoriously difficult to establish. Mr. Goodwin, what you call theft, the law calls legitimate acquisition through lawful authority. The law in 1858, maybe. The law today has different views about looted cultural property, which is precisely why the ledger should remain private. Mr. Wolfe, I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to compensate Mr. Ashcroft generously for his family's documentation. I'm also prepared to make substantial donations to cultural preservation funds in India. Everyone benefits. All I ask is that the ledger and its contents remain confidential. Wolfe picked up his beer glass. Mr. Fairfax, you're asking me to help you suppress evidence of historical crimes so you can continue profiting from stolen property. I decline. Furthermore, if I discover you've made threats against Mr. Ashcroft or any other person connected to this matter, I will ensure Inspector Kramer of the New York Police Department hears about it immediately. Threats? Mr. Wolfe, I don't make threats. I make offers. If people choose not to accept them, that's their prerogative. The voice hardened slightly, but I should mention that I'm not the only interested party. There are others, in London, in New York, in India, who have strong feelings about how this matter should be resolved. Some of them are far less civilized than I am. Is that a threat, Mr. Fairfax? It's a warning. Mr. Ashcroft has opened a door that some people would prefer remained closed. Those people may take actions that I neither control nor condone. If harm comes to anyone because of Mr. Ashcroft's crusade for historical justice, the responsibility lies with him, not with those who tried to prevent the tragedy. Convenient moral logic. Pragmatic logic, Mr. Wolfe. Good day. The line went dead. Wolfe and I looked at each other. Well, I said, that was illuminating. Fairfax just admitted he's in New York. He knows about the ledger, and he's aware of other parties who want it suppressed or destroyed. He also as good as admitted he's been coordinating with them. Yes, and his offer of $50,000 suggests desperation. Men who are confident don't offer bribes that large. Wolfe reached for his button. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him Marcus Fairfax just attempted to bribe us to betray a client and should be questioned immediately regarding the attack on Professor Wycliffe. Also mention that Fairfax implied knowledge of other threats against Mr. Ashcroft. I made the call. Kramer was at his desk and answered immediately. Goodwin, what now? Marcus Fairfax just called offering $50,000 to turn Ashcroft over to him. He's in New York. He knows about the ledger, and he made what sounded like veiled threats about others who might harm Ashcroft. You might want to have a conversation with him. Where's he staying? Didn't say, but he's got money. Try the expensive hotels. Plaza St. Regis, Pierre. I'll find him. Anything else? Yeah. How's Professor Wycliffe? Still unconscious. Doctors say if he wakes up in the next 48 hours, he'll probably survive. If not, Kramer trailed off. I hate attempted murder cases. Either the victim dies and it becomes real murder, or they survive and you've got a traumatized witness who may not remember anything useful. Let us know if he wakes up. We've got questions for him. After hanging up, I turned to find Emma Harrington standing in the doorway. She'd been up early, working on her story, and looked wired on coffee and adrenaline. That was Fairfax? She asked. Yes. He tried to bribe Wolfe to hand over Ashcroft and the ledger. That means he's desperate. Good. She came into the office and sat in the red leather chair. Mr. Wolfe, I've been thinking about the other 5 families. If Fairfax is this worried about exposure, the others must be equally concerned. I should contact them directly, give them a chance to respond to my story before publication. Absolutely not, Wolfe said flatly. You will not contact anyone connected to this case without my approval. Every person you've contacted so far has either been attacked or is now in danger. I will not have you painting targets on additional backs. But journalistic ethics require Journalistic ethics can wait until we've neutralized the immediate threats. Miss Harrington, you hired me to keep you alive for 48 hours. That requires you to follow my instructions. No contact with sources, no publication of partial information, no freelance investigation. You will remain in this brownstone, work on your story, and let me handle the dangerous aspects. She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Wolfe's expression stopped her. Fine, but I need access to my source's contact information to verify facts for the story. I can't publish without confirming details. Verify through me or through Archie. Provide the questions and we'll find the answers, but you will not expose yourself by making direct contact. After she left, looking frustrated but obedient, Wolfe turned to me. Archie, I want complete backgrounds on the other 5 families Fairfax mentioned. Names, current locations, holdings, and any connection to New York. If they're coordinating with Fairfax to suppress the ledger, we need to know who they are and what they're capable of. That's a lot of research for one morning. Then enlist assistance. Call Dr. Mehta at the Lexington Hotel. Ask if she's willing to share her research on the 6 families. Explain that we're trying to prevent further violence, and her cooperation would be appreciated. I called the Lexington. Dr. Mehta answered her room phone after 3 rings, sounding cautious. Dr. Mehta, this is Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. We're representing James Ashcroft and Emma Harrington. I understand you've been researching the 6 British families connected to the Agra lootings. Would you be willing to share that information? There was a long pause. Is Emma all right? I heard about the attack on Professor Wycliffe. I've been trying to reach her. She's fine. She's staying here at the brownstone under protection. But we need information about the other families, who they are, where they are, and whether they pose a threat. I can provide that. But Mr. Goodwin, you should know, 2 of the families are in New York right now. I've confirmed sightings. Which 2? The Fairfax family, obviously, Marcus is here, and the Thornbury family. Lady Vivienne Thornbury arrived 3 days ago. She's staying at the Pier Hotel, and she's been making inquiries about James Ashcroft's whereabouts. What's her connection to the lootings? Her great-great-grandfather was Major William Thornbury, another of the 6 officers. The Thornbury family owns one of the largest private collections of South Asian antiquities in England. If James's ledger is made public, she'll face repatriation claims worth millions. Has she threatened anyone? Not that I know of, but she's hired private investigators to locate James. I saw them questioning hotel staff at the Waldorf 2 days ago. I covered the mouthpiece and repeated this to Wolfe. He nodded grimly. Dr. Mehta, I said, would you be willing to come here and brief us in person? Mr. Wolfe would like to ask you questions about the families, about your research, and about who else might pose a threat. I can be there in an hour. After hanging up, I looked at Wolfe. So we've got Fairfax and Thornbury both in New York, both trying to locate Ashcroft, both with millions in stolen property at stake. That's 2 potential killers confirmed. Plus whoever from the Prasad family attempted the attack on Professor Wycliffe, believing him to be Ashcroft. Wolfe drummed his fingers on the desk. We're approaching a critical moment, Archie. Multiple parties are converging on this brownstone, all seeking either to eliminate our clients or to suppress the evidence they possess. We must force a resolution before the violence escalates further. How? By using the one thing everyone wants, the ledger itself. This evening, we will hold a gathering here. I'll invite Fairfax, Thornbury, representatives of the Prasad family, and anyone else with a stake in this matter. We'll put the ledger on display, let them argue their cases, and see who reveals themselves as the killer. That's risky. You're essentially inviting multiple murder suspects into the brownstone. The brownstone is secure. We have 6 dogs, bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, and you. More importantly, we have leverage, possession of the ledger and knowledge they don't know we have. If we control the environment and the information, we control the outcome. And if someone tries violence right here in the office, then we respond appropriately. But Archie, I don't think they will. Violence is a last resort when other methods fail. If we offer them a chance to negotiate, to make their cases, to compete for the ledger through persuasion rather than murder, most will take it. And the one who refuses, the one who insists on violence, will reveal themselves. You're gambling that rational self-interest will override murderous impulses. I'm gambling that most people prefer negotiation to prison, the ones who don't. Wolfe's expression hardened. Well, that's what Caesar and his pack are for. Dr. Lakshmi Mehta arrived at 11 o'clock, escorted by Saul Panzer, who'd been assigned to ensure she reached the brownstone safely. She was a handsome woman in her mid-40s, wearing a burgundy sari and carrying a battered leather briefcase that suggested years of field research. Mars examined her carefully at the door. She passed inspection, and Fritz showed her to the office. She declined coffee, but accepted tea, which Fritz prepared with his usual excellence. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, settling into the red leather chair, "I'm pleased to finally meet you. Your reputation precedes you, as does yours, Dr. Mehta. I understand you've spent 20 years researching colonial-era theft and repatriation. That's dedication. It's also personal. My great-great-grandfather was a scholar in Agra who documented the 1857 lootings. His journals were lost, but his memory drove me to reconstruct what was taken and from whom. When James Ashcroft contacted me with a complete ledger documenting exactly that, it was like finding the Holy Grail. And yet you didn't work exclusively with Mr. Ashcroft. You reached out to others. Emma Harrington, Professor Wycliffe, the Indian consulate. Why? Because one ledger isn't enough. There were 6 officers involved in the systematic looting. Colonel Ashcroft kept records, but what about the others? If we're going to pursue comprehensive repatriation, we need documentation of all 6 families' activities. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I've spent the past 6 weeks tracking down references in British military archives, museum acquisition records, and family papers. I've identified at least 200 items that can be traced to the Agra lootings and are currently in private or institutional collections. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. 200 items, estimated value? Conservative estimate? $20 million. Possibly twice that, if certain pieces are as valuable as I believe. I let out a low whistle. That's not a historical curiosity, that's a fortune. Exactly, which is why people are willing to kill to protect it. She pulled out photographs. These are the 6 families. You already know about Fairfax and Ashcroft. Let me tell you about the others. She spread the photographs across Wolfe's desk. Major William Thornbury, Lady Vivienne Thornbury's ancestor. He specialized in religious artifacts, temple sculptures, sacred texts, ritual objects. The Thornbury collection in their estate in Hampshire is considered one of the finest private South Asian collections in Britain. Market value, $8 to $10 million. Lady Vivienne has spent her life curating and expanding it. If she's forced to return items, the collection loses most of its value. Captain Geoffrey Hammond. No direct descendants, but his collection was sold in the 1920s and dispersed through various dealers. Much of it ended up in American museums, including several pieces at the Brooklyn Museum and the Met. Lieutenant James Hartley, his great-grandson, Philip Hartley, is a member of Parliament and chairman of the British Museum's Board of Trustees. He's been quietly blocking repatriation efforts for years. If the Agra ledgers become public, his political career is finished. Major Arthur Pemberton. His descendants sold their collection in the 1950s to various American collectors. Trail goes cold after that, but I suspect many items are still in private hands. Captain Edward Blackwood died without heirs. His collection was auctioned in 1889 and dispersed. Wolfe studied the photographs. So we have Fairfax and Thornbury in New York actively trying to suppress the ledger. Hammond and Blackwood's collections are dispersed and their descendants aren't factors. That leaves Hartley and Pemberton. What are they doing? Hartley has been lobbying the British government to block any official repatriation inquiries. He's using his position at the British Museum to delay and obstruct. Pemberton's descendants, she hesitated. That's more complicated. The family split in the 1950s after the collection was sold. There was a dispute over proceeds. Half the family disowned the other half. I haven't been able to track down current whereabouts for all of them. Could any of them be in New York? Possibly. But if they are, I haven't found them. Wolfe nodded slowly. Dr. Mehta, thank you for this information. It's invaluable. Now I have a more difficult question. Did you encourage the Prasad family to seek violent revenge against James Ashcroft? Her face went pale. No, absolutely not. I told them about the ledger entry, documenting what was stolen from their ancestors. I offered to help them pursue legal restitution. They became angry, understandably, but I never suggested violence. Never. Yet someone from the Prasad household was seen near the Hotel Churchill shortly after an attempted break-in on Ashcroft's room. And the same method, strangulation with a silk cord, was used in both the London attack and the assault on Professor Wycliffe. I don't know anything about that. I gave them information. What they chose to do with it, she trailed off. Mr. Wolfe, I believe in justice through legal channels, but I can't control what people do when they learn their ancestors were murdered and robbed. Some of them want more than legal restitution. They want blood debt paid in blood. Which is why I'm holding a gathering this evening. I'll invite the Prasad family, along with Fairfax, Thornbury, and anyone else with a stake in this matter. We'll put all the cards on the table and see who's willing to negotiate and who's committed to violence. That's dangerous. Yes, but less dangerous than allowing multiple parties to pursue independent vengeance. Better to force a confrontation in a controlled environment than to wait for them to act on their own terms. After Dr. Mehta left again, escorted by Saul, I turned to Wolfe. You're really going to invite potential killers into the brownstone and hope they don't try to kill anyone? I'm going to invite them into a fortress where we control every variable, where they're outnumbered and outmaneuvered, and where any attempt at violence will be met with immediate and overwhelming response. That's not hope, Archie. That's strategy. And if the strategy fails, then we'll have confirmation of who the killer is, and Inspector Kramer will have probable cause to make arrests. Either way, we force resolution. You're assuming everyone will accept the invitation. They will, because I'm offering something they all want, a chance to make their case for the ledger before it's handed over to authorities or published in The Guardian. Greed, pride, and desperation will bring them here, and when they arrive, he smiled coldly, we'll discover which debts they're willing to settle peacefully, and which require force. I spent the rest of the day making calls. Fairfax reached through his hotel, the St. Regis, accepted the invitation immediately. Lady Vivienne Thornbury at the pier also accepted, though her tone suggested she considered the entire exercise beneath her dignity. The Prasad family took more persuasion, but eventually the young man Saul had observed, whose name was Amit Prasad, agreed to attend along with his uncle. By 6 o'clock, everything was arranged. Fritz had prepared the office for guests. Extra chairs, coffee service, and a discreet signal button under his serving tray in case things went wrong. The dogs were positioned strategically. Caesar and Mars at the front entrance, Apollo at the rear, Minerva on the stairs, Diana in the basement, and Loyal in the office itself, lying under my desk where he could watch everyone. Ashcroft and Harrington were upstairs. Wolfe had instructed them to remain in their rooms until called. They were the evidence, and evidence didn't need to be present until the right moment. At 7:30 the guests began arriving. Lady Vivienne Thornbury came first, a woman of perhaps 60, dressed in expensive but understated clothing, moving with the particular grace of British aristocracy. She examined the brownstone's interior with barely concealed disdain, as if slumming among the colonial classes. Caesar watched her with professional interest. She ignored him completely, which showed either great courage or great foolishness. Marcus Fairfax arrived 10 minutes later. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of cultivated handsomeness that suggested regular tennis and expensive barbers. He acknowledged Lady Thornbury with a slight nod, as if they'd discussed meeting here beforehand. They had, I realized. They were coordinating. The Prasads came last. Amit, the young man Saul had observed, and his uncle Rejan, who was perhaps 55 and carried himself with quiet dignity. They looked uncomfortable in the elegant surroundings, but their eyes were sharp and assessing. Mars growled low when they entered, not threatening, just announcing their presence. Rejan nodded to the dog with what looked like respect. I showed them all into the office, where Wolfe was waiting behind his desk, the mahogany box containing the ledger visible but closed. "Ladies, gentlemen," Wolfe said without rising, "thank you for coming. Please be seated. We have matters to discuss that affect us all." They took their chairs in wary silence, each studying the others, each calculating their position in the game we were about to play. And in that moment, I realized what Wolfe had done. He'd assembled everyone with motive to kill James Ashcroft in one room, under conditions we controlled, where their interactions would reveal their guilt or innocence. It was brilliant. It was also terrifying, because somewhere in this room was at least one person willing to kill to protect their interests, and we were about to find out who. Wolfe surveyed his assembled guests with the calm of a man who'd orchestrated dozens of confrontations and survived them all. He picked up his beer glass, took a measured sip, and set it down with deliberate precision. "Let me begin with facts," he said. 6 days ago, someone attempted to murder James Ashcroft in London. 3 days ago, someone delivered a death threat to his hotel room here in New York. Yesterday morning, Professor Thomas Wycliffe was attacked in Central Park, an attack meant for Mr. Ashcroft, who had been staying at the hotel where Professor Wycliffe went looking for him. All 3 incidents employed the same method: strangulation with a silk cord, a traditional Indian assassination technique. Someone in this room knows who committed those acts. Possibly someone in this room committed them. The silence was absolute. Even the dogs seemed to be holding their breath. Lady Thornbury broke it first. "Mr. Wolfe, I came here because you promised an opportunity to discuss the disposition of Colonel Ashcroft's ledger. I did not come to be accused of attempted murder." "I have accused no one. Yet." Wolfe gestured toward the mahogany box. "The ledger documents systematic theft and murder committed in Agra between 1857 and 1858 by 6 British officers, including Colonel Sir Reginald Ashcroft and Major William Thornbury, your great-great-grandfather, Lady Thornbury. The items he stole form the core of your family's collection, items you've spent your life protecting and expanding. Items my family acquired lawfully during a period of military administration. The Empire's property laws were clear. The Empire's property laws sanctioned theft. That doesn't make the theft legal by modern standards, and it certainly doesn't make it moral." Wolfe turned to Fairfax. "Your family has an even more direct connection. Captain Henry Fairfax didn't just steal artifacts. He established a business selling them, a business your family continues to operate. The Fairfax Gallery in Mayfair has been laundering stolen property for 3 generations." Fairfax's expression remained calm, but I saw his jaw tighten. "Those are serious allegations, Mr. Wolfe. Do you have proof, or are you simply repeating gossip?" "I have Colonel Ashcroft's ledger, which documents your great-grandfather's participation in the lootings. I have acquisition records from your gallery, showing items that match descriptions in the ledger. And I have testimony from experts like Dr. Lakshmi Mehta, confirming that your family has been selling artifacts of questionable provenance for decades." Wolfe paused. "I also have evidence that you're in New York specifically to suppress the ledger's publication. You offered me $50,000 this morning to betray my client. That's consciousness of guilt, Mr. Fairfax. It's a business proposition. I offered to compensate Mr. Ashcroft and facilitate quiet restitution rather than public scandal. That's not guilt, it's pragmatism. It's also obstruction of justice." Wolfe shifted his attention to the Prasads. "And then we have you, gentlemen. Your ancestors were among Colonel Ashcroft's victims. According to the ledger entry for March 15, 1858, the Colonel's forces entered your family home in Agra, seized property worth nearly £400, and removed occupants by force when resistance was encountered. That's a euphemism for murder. Members of your family died trying to protect their property from thieves." Rajan Prasad's face was carved from stone. "You are correct, Mr. Wolfe. My great-great-grandfather and his brother were killed by British soldiers. Their widows and children were left destitute. The family never recovered. We have carried that loss for nearly a century. And now you've learned the identity of the man who ordered those murders. The question is, what have you done with that knowledge?" Amit Prasad leaned forward, his young face intense. "We've done what any family would do. We've sought justice. Legal justice, Mr. Wolfe. We consulted with Dr. Mehta about filing repatriation claims. We contacted the Indian consulate about pursuing the matter through diplomatic channels. We have not resorted to violence." Yet someone from your household was observed near the Hotel Churchill, shortly after an attempt was made to break into Mr. Ashcroft's room. That same person took a subway to Manhattan and back. Explain that. Rajan and Amit exchanged glances. Rajan spoke carefully. "I went to the hotel, not to harm Mr. Ashcroft, but to speak with him. Dr. Mehta had told us he was trying to make restitution, and I wanted to hear his intentions directly to understand if his remorse was genuine or merely performance. But when I arrived, the hotel staff said no one by that name was registered. I asked if a British gentleman was staying there, and they refused to answer, so I left." "At what time?" "Perhaps 6:30 in the evening. I returned home immediately." "And you didn't attempt to force entry to any room?" "Absolutely not. I am not a violent man, Mr. Wolfe. I am a school teacher. I teach mathematics to children in Brooklyn. The idea that I would attempt murder is absurd." Wolfe studied him in silence. Perhaps, yet someone did attempt that break-in, and someone did attack Professor Wycliffe, believing him to be Mr. Ashcroft. If not you, then who? Lady Thornbury cleared her throat. Mr. Wolfe, this is all very dramatic, but I fail to see the point. You've assembled us here, made vague accusations, and implied we're all suspects in attempted murder. But you've provided no proof of anything except that my ancestor and Mr. Fairfax's ancestor participated in colonial-era acquisitions that were lawful at the time. What exactly do you want from us? I want the truth about who's trying to kill James Ashcroft. And I want to know which of you is willing to negotiate peaceful resolution and which is committed to violence. Wolfe reached for the mahogany box and opened it, revealing the ledger. This document will be made public. That's inevitable. Miss Emma Harrington will publish her story within 48 hours, exposing all 6 families and their holdings. The question is, how do you respond? Do you cooperate with restitution efforts and attempt to salvage your reputations? Or do you continue fighting, continue threatening, and ultimately face criminal prosecution for obstruction and conspiracy to commit murder? Fairfax stood abruptly. You're blackmailing us. I'm offering clarity. Miss Harrington's story will be published regardless of your cooperation. But if you work with authorities on restitution, you might avoid criminal charges. If you continue fighting, particularly if violence continues, you'll face the full weight of law enforcement in 2 countries. That's not blackmail, that's consequence. And what do you get out of this, Mr. Wolfe? What's your stake in exposing colonial-era crimes? My stake is ensuring my client remains alive long enough to complete his efforts at restitution. Someone has made 3 attempts to kill him. Until I identify that person and neutralize the threat, Mr. Ashcroft remains in danger. So I've brought all the suspects together in one room, under controlled conditions, to force revelation. One of you knows who the killer is. Possibly one of you is the killer. And before this evening ends, I will know which. Lady Thornbury's expression turned cold. You can't hold us here against our will. We're free to leave at any time. Of course. But if you leave now, Inspector Kramer of the New York Police Department will be very interested in why you refuse to cooperate with an investigation into attempted murder. He's currently interviewing Professor Wycliffe's associates, and your names have come up frequently. Wolfe paused. Stay. Answer questions. Demonstrate your innocence, and you leave free and clear. Run, and you look guilty. The room settled into tense silence. No one moved toward the door. Good, Wolfe said. Then let's begin with opportunity. Mr. Fairfax, where were you yesterday morning between 7 and 8 o'clock? In my hotel room at the St. Regis. I had breakfast delivered via room service. The records will confirm it. And 6 days ago, when the first attempt was made on Mr. Ashcroft in London? I was in London, yes, at my gallery. I have staff who can confirm my presence throughout that day. Staff you employ. Not exactly unbiased witnesses. Wolfe turned to Lady Thornbury. And you? I arrived in New York 3 days ago. I couldn't possibly have been involved in the London attempt. As for yesterday morning, I was having breakfast at the Pierre with my secretary. Again, easily verified. Conveniently alibied. Wolfe's gaze moved to the Prasads. And you, gentlemen? Rajan answered. I teach classes Monday through Friday. Yesterday morning I was in my classroom from 7:30 to 3 o'clock. 30 students and 2 other teachers can confirm it. And your nephew? Amit shifted uncomfortably. I was at home, alone. I'd worked a late shift Saturday night. I'm a hospital orderly, and slept until noon. No alibi then? No. But I didn't attack anyone. I've never even been to Central Park. Wolfe absorbed this, his expression unreadable. Then he pressed the button on his desk. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. James Ashcroft entered the office, looking pale but determined. Behind him came Emma Harrington, her notebook under her arm, her green eyes taking in the assembled guests with professional assessment. Lady Thornbury's face registered shock. Good God, that's Harrington, the journalist. You've brought a reporter to this meeting? Miss Harrington is my client, just as Mr. Ashcroft is. She's also the person who will tell this story to the world. I thought you might wish to speak with her directly, to provide context, to explain your positions, perhaps to negotiate how you're portrayed. Wolfe gestured to the empty chairs Fritz had positioned. Please sit. Ashcroft took a chair near my desk, positioning himself where he could see everyone. Harrington remained standing, her reporter's instincts in full gear. Fairfax stared at Ashcroft with barely concealed hostility. "So, the man who started all this trouble. Tell me, Mr. Ashcroft, do you feel proud of yourself? You've exposed family secrets that harm innocent descendants, triggered violence, and created chaos across 2 continents, all to satisfy your guilty conscience." "I'm trying to right historical wrongs," Ashcroft said quietly. "My great-grandfather was a thief and a murderer. I can't change what he did, but I can try to make amends. By destroying the families of men who served the Empire honorably. Your great-grandfather and mine were soldiers following orders, Mr. Ashcroft. They didn't make the laws. They didn't create the system. They simply served. They stole sacred objects from temples. They murdered people who tried to protect their property. Following orders doesn't excuse that." Lady Thornbury's voice cut through like ice. "You're a hypocrite, Mr. Ashcroft. You've lived your entire life benefiting from your great-grandfather's acquisitions, your education, your home, your position, all of it funded by the wealth he accumulated. And now you develop a conscience. Now you decide to destroy other families who've done exactly what yours has done. It's not justice you're seeking, it's moral superiority." "It's accountability," Harrington interjected. 6 British families have been profiting from theft and murder for nearly a century. That ends now. My story will document everything, the original crimes, the current holdings, and the attempts to suppress exposure. The public deserves to know. "The public deserves context," Fairfax shot back. "Colonial administration was complex. Property law during that period was different. You can't judge historical actions by modern moral standards. I can judge murder by any standard. Your great-grandfather killed people, Mr. Fairfax. So did yours, Lady Thornbury. So did Colonel Ashcroft. Those aren't historical complexities. Those are crimes." Rajan Prasad spoke, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Miss Harrington is correct. My ancestors were murdered so yours could steal our property and sell it for profit. You speak of historical context and legal complexities. I speak of blood on your hands, blood that stains your families still." "We weren't there," Lady Thornbury said. "We didn't commit those acts." "No, but you profit from them. You display stolen property in your homes. You sell it through your galleries. You benefit from wealth built on murder. That makes you complicit. It makes us inheritors of historical circumstance. It makes you thieves." The word hung in the air, like an accusation carved in stone. Lady Thornbury's face flushed red. Fairfax's hands clenched. Amit Prasad nodded in grim satisfaction. And Wolfe, watching all of it with those half-closed eyes, absorbed every reaction, every tell, every flash of genuine emotion. "Enough," he said finally. "We're not here to debate colonial morality. We're here to identify who's willing to commit murder, to protect secrets or achieve revenge. Mr. Fairfax, Lady Thornbury, I ask you directly, did either of you arrange the attacks on Mr. Ashcroft or Professor Wycliffe?" "No," Fairfax said flatly. "Absolutely not," Lady Thornbury echoed. "I may find Mr. Ashcroft's crusade misguided and destructive, but I don't kill people over historical property disputes. Yet someone does. Someone with knowledge of Mr. Ashcroft's movements, access to his locations, and motivation to silence him permanently." Wolfe turned to the Prasads. "And you, gentlemen, did you or any member of your family arrange those attacks?" "No," Rajan said firmly. "We seek justice, not vengeance, legal justice. Your nephew has no alibi for yesterday morning's attack. Neither do thousands of other people in New York," Amit said, his voice rising. "You can't accuse me of attempted murder just because I was home alone. I can note the coincidence. You were observed near the Hotel Churchill. You have motive, your family's historical grievance, and you have no alibi for the time of the attack on Professor Wycliffe." Wolfe paused. "Unless you can provide evidence of your innocence, Mr. Prasad, you remain a primary suspect." Amit looked at his uncle desperately. Rajan's face was grim. "Mr. Wolfe," Rajan said carefully, "my nephew is a good young man. He works hard, supports his family, and has never been in trouble with the law. The anger he feels about our family's history is understandable, but it doesn't make him a killer. Then help me eliminate him as a suspect. Tell me who else might have committed these attacks. Someone with knowledge, means, and opportunity." Rajan was silent for a long moment. "Then, there are others. Other families who lost loved ones in the Agra lootings. Dr. Mehta has been contacting them, building a coalition for legal claims. Some of them, he hesitated, some of them are not as committed to legal processes as we are. Names? I don't know all of them, but Dr. Mehta would. She has a list of descendants she's contacted over the past 6 weeks. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, call Dr. Mehta. Ask her to return here immediately with her list of contacted families. Tell her it's urgent. I made the call from my desk phone. Dr. Mehta answered immediately, agreed to come and said she'd bring her research files. While we waited, the office settled into uncomfortable silence. Ashcroft looked miserable. Harrington was taking notes. Fairfax and Lady Thornbury exchanged occasional glances that suggested private communication. The Prasards sat quietly, uncle and nephew side by side, presenting a united front. And Loyal, still under my desk, watched everyone with those intelligent eyes. He hadn't moved the entire evening, but I could feel his alertness. He was tracking every person in the room, assessing threats, ready to move if necessary. Smart dog. Dr. Mehta arrived 20 minutes later, escorted by Saul Panzer. She entered the office, saw the assembled guests, and stopped short. Mr. Wolfe, what is this? A gathering of interested parties. You've met most of them. He gestured to the red leather chair. Please sit. I need your list of Indian families you've contacted regarding the Agra lootings. She hesitated, then pulled a folder from her briefcase. I've reached out to 17 families over the past 6 weeks. Most are in India, but 4 are in the United States. The Prasards in Brooklyn. She nodded to Rajan and Amit. The Kapoors in New Jersey, the Sens in Boston, and the Sharmas in Chicago. Any of them express interest in violent revenge rather than legal restitution? Not openly, but, she paused, the Kapoors were particularly angry. When I showed them the ledger entries documenting what was stolen from their ancestors, the father, Deepak Kapoor, said that some debts can only be paid in blood. I tried to redirect him toward legal options, but he was unmoved. Where are the Kapoors now? New Jersey, Edison, I believe. How far is that from Manhattan? Maybe 45 minutes by car. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him to send detectives to the Kapoor residence immediately. If they're not home, he should issue an alert for Deepak Kapoor, material witness, in an attempted murder investigation. I made the call. Kramer swore, said he'd handle it, and hung up. Wolfe addressed Dr. Mehta again. When did you contact the Kapoors? 5 days ago. I showed them the ledger entries, explained the restitution process, and offered to help them file legal claims. And their response? Initial gratitude that someone was documenting the crimes, then anger when they realized how much had been stolen and how little chance there was of real recovery. Deepak Kapoor said the British families should pay with more than money, that they should understand what it means to lose everything. That sounds like a threat. It sounded like pain, Mr. Wolfe. Generational pain that's been passed down father to son for nearly a century. I don't condone violence, but I understand the anger. Understanding doesn't prevent murder. Wolfe picked up his beer glass. Dr. Mehta, did you mention James Ashcroft's name to the Kapoors? Yes. I told them he was the one who'd found the ledger and was trying to make restitution. I thought it would reassure them, show them that not all descendants of perpetrators were trying to hide the crimes. Instead, you may have painted a target on his back. Her face went pale. I never imagined they... You armed them with information and motivation. What they did with it was predictable. Wolfe set down his glass. This is why exposure of historical crimes must be handled carefully. Every revelation creates ripples. Some of those ripples are legal proceedings and museum returns. Others are violence and revenge. You can't control which. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin.
It's Kramer. The Kapoors aren't home. Neighbors say they haven't seen them in 2 days. We've issued an alert, but if they're hiding, it could take time to find them.
Any indication they were planning something? Neba said she saw Deepak Kapoor loading luggage into his car Saturday morning. Looked like they were taking a trip. Could be innocent. Could be suspicious. I hung up and relayed this to Wolfe. He nodded slowly. So, the Kapoors have disappeared, possibly to avoid questioning, possibly to pursue their own form of justice. That makes them primary suspects. He looked around the office at his assembled guests. Ladies, gentlemen, I believe we have our answer. The attempts on Mr. Ashcroft's life were not committed by the British families seeking to protect their holdings, nor by the Prasad family seeking legal restitution. They were committed by the Kapoors, a family driven by generational anger to pursue blood debt rather than legal justice. You can't know that for certain, Fairfax objected. No, but I can make a reasonable deduction based on evidence, opportunity, motive, suspicious behavior, and timely disappearance. Inspector Kramer will investigate further, but for our purposes tonight, I'm satisfied that neither Lady Thornbury nor Mr. Fairfax, nor the Prasad family, is responsible for the violence, which means you're all free to leave, though I strongly suggest you cooperate with Miss Harrington's story and with restitution efforts. Running will only make you look guilty. Lady Thornbury stood with regal dignity. I will consult with my solicitors regarding Miss Harrington's story. As for restitution, that will be determined through proper legal channels, not through mob justice disguised as journalism. That's your prerogative, but the story will be published regardless. She left without another word, followed by Fairfax, who paused at the door. Mr. Wolfe, you've played this well, but you should know, not all the families will be as cooperative as Lady Thornbury, and I have been tonight. Some will fight harder, some will fight dirtier. Let them try. After they'd gone, the Prasads stood to leave as well. Rajan approached Wolfe's desk. Mr. Wolfe, thank you for clearing our names, and thank you for trying to bring justice to this matter. It's more than anyone else has done in nearly a century. Justice is my profession, Mr. Prasad, even when it's complicated and painful. After they left, only Ashcroft, Harrington, Dr. Mehta, Saul, and I remained. Wolfe looked exhausted. These extended performances always took a toll on him. That was masterful, Harrington said. You eliminated 3 sets of suspects and identified the real threat in under 2 hours. I identified the probable threat. Proof will require Inspector Kramer's investigation. But yes, the Kapoors are our primary suspects now. Wolfe glanced at Dr. Mehta. Your work has had consequences, Dr. Mehta. Some good, some tragic. I hope you'll be more careful in the future about whom you share sensitive information with. I will, I promise. She looked shaken. I never meant for anyone to be hurt. No one ever does. But good intentions don't prevent violence. Only wisdom and caution do that. After Dr. Mehta left, Ashcroft remained in his chair, looking drained. Mr. Wolfe, do you really think the Kapoors tried to kill me? I think it's the most likely explanation. But Mr. Ashcroft, understand this. Even if the Kapoors are caught and prosecuted, your troubles aren't over. You've exposed 6 families to public scrutiny and potential legal action. Some of them will accept it gracefully. Others will fight. You've started something that will take years to resolve, and the process won't be pleasant. I know, but it's the right thing to do. Yes, unfortunately, doing the right thing often costs more than doing nothing. That's the burden of conscience. Wolfe stood, signaling the evening was over. Go to bed, Mr. Ashcroft. Tomorrow you'll give a full statement to Inspector Kramer. Miss Harrington will finalize her story, and with luck the Kapoors will be apprehended before they make another attempt. For tonight you're safe. That's all any of us can ask. After Ashcroft and Harrington had gone upstairs, I looked at Wolfe. You really think it's over? I think the immediate threat has been identified and contained. Whether it's over, he shrugged. Colonial debts don't resolve quickly, Archie. We've forced one resolution, but there will be others. Legal battles, repatriation claims, family disputes. This case will echo for years. But we kept the client alive. Yes, that at least we accomplished. He headed for the elevator. Good night, Archie. Tomorrow will be busy. I made my final rounds, checking doors, windows, and dogs. Caesar and Mars were at their posts. Apollo guarded the rear. Minerva watched from the stairs. Diana patrolled the basement, and Loyal returned to his spot under my desk. The brownstone was secure. The clients were safe. The killer had been identified, if not yet caught. Not a bad night's work. But Wolfe was right. This case was far from over. The colonial debt had been accumulating interest for nearly a century, and we'd only just begun the process of settling accounts. Tomorrow would bring more complications, more revelations, more consequences. But tonight, we'd won a small victory. And in cases like this, small victories were all you could hope for. Tuesday morning brought news from two sources, neither of them good. The first came at 8 o'clock, when Inspector Kramer called. I was at my desk with coffee and the morning papers. The Times had a small item about Professor Wycliffe's attack, but nothing about the larger story yet. When the phone rang, Goodwin. It's Kramer. Wycliffe died an hour ago, never regained consciousness. The attempted murder just became a murder. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Hell, yeah, which means I've got a homicide investigation, and the Capapors just became my primary suspects for murder, not just attempted murder. You got anything else for me? Not yet. Wolfe eliminated Fairfax, Thornbury and the Prassards last night, based on alibis and motivation. The Kapors are your best bet. I've got detectives checking bus stations, train stations, airports. If they're still in the area, we'll find them. If they've fled, he trailed off. Just keep your clients locked down. If the Kapors are desperate enough to kill a professor in Central Park, they won't hesitate to try again. After hanging up, I went upstairs to inform Wolfe, who was in his bedroom preparing for his morning session in the plant rooms. He listened to the news about Wycliffe's death with grim acceptance. Unfortunate, but not unexpected. The attack was brutal. Oxygen deprivation severe enough to cause brain death. Inspector Kramer will pursue the Kapors vigorously, now that it's a murder investigation. He adjusted his tie. Inform Mr. Ashcroft and Miss Harrington. They should know that the stakes have escalated. I knocked on Ashcroft's door first. He answered, looking haggard. Clearly he hadn't slept well. Mr. Goodwin? Is something wrong? Professor Wycliffe died this morning. The attempted murder is now a homicide. Inspector Kramer is hunting the Kapors, but until they're caught, you're still in danger. His face crumbled. Thomas is dead? Because of me? Because he tried to warn me? He's dead because someone strangled him. That's on the killer, not on you. But if I hadn't found the ledger, if I hadn't started all this, then the crimes would remain hidden. The stolen property would remain in the hands of thieves, and the families who were victimized would never have any hope of justice. Stop blaming yourself for other people's violence, Mr. Ashcroft. You're trying to do the right thing. That someone else chose murder as a response is their moral failure, not yours. He nodded miserably, but I could tell he didn't believe it. Guilt was eating him alive. Guilt for his great-grandfather's crimes. Guilt for the violence his exposure had triggered. Guilt for still being alive when Wycliffe was dead. I left him and went to Harrington's room. She was already awake and dressed, working on her laptop. Wait, no laptops in 1955. She was working at a typewriter Fritz had provided, pages of typed copy spread across the desk. Wycliffe's dead, I said without preamble. Thought you should know. She stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys. When? Hour ago. Never woke up. God. She pulled the current page from the typewriter and set it aside. I'll need to update the story. Thomas deserves proper tribute. He was a good man, a real scholar. He cared about truth. He cared enough to get himself killed. He cared enough to risk death for what was right. That's different. She looked at me directly. Mr. Goodwin, I need to ask something. When I publish this story, probably tomorrow, there's going to be backlash, legal threats, professional retaliation, possibly physical danger. Am I still under Mr. Wolfe's protection after publication? That's between you and Wolfe. But I'd guess yes, he doesn't abandon clients just because they become inconvenient. You hired him for 48 hours. He'll honor that, and probably longer if you need it. Good, because once this story breaks, everyone I've named is going to want me silenced. Fairfax, Thornbury, the other families, they'll all have lawyers and possibly worse coming after me. Then you'll stay here until it's safe to leave. We've got room, and Fritz likes cooking for a full house. I paused. How's the story coming? Nearly done. I'm writing Thomas's death as the tragic culmination of a century of cover-ups and violence. The man who tried to expose colonial crimes was murdered by someone seeking to hide them. It's powerful material. Just make sure it's accurate. Wolfe says the Kapors are the likely killers, not the British families. I know, but the British families created the conditions that made the Kapors' anger possible. You can't steal from people, murder them, and then claim innocence when their descendants seek revenge a century later. That's moral bankruptcy. Maybe, but it's also legally relevant. You accuse the wrong people of murder, and you're looking at libel suits. I'll be careful. But I won't soften the truth to protect thieves. She returned to her typewriter. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a story to finish. Thomas Wycliffe deserves to be remembered for his courage, and I intend to make sure he is. I left her to it and returned downstairs, where Fritz was preparing breakfast. The smell of fresh-baked bread and coffee filled the brownstone. One of the things I appreciated about Fritz was his ability to maintain normalcy, even when everything else was chaos. Loyal was in the kitchen accepting small pieces of bacon. Fritz snuck in between tasks. The other dogs were at their posts, Caesar and Mars at the front, Apollo at the rear, Minerva on the stairs, Diana in the basement. The brownstone was secure. At least I thought it was secure. The second piece of bad news came at 9:30. Fritz was serving breakfast in the dining room. Ashcroft and Harrington had both come down, though neither was eating much, when all 6 dogs suddenly went on high alert. Not barking yet, but the shift in their posture was unmistakable. Caesar and Mars moved to the front windows, their bodies tense. Apollo appeared from the rear hallway, ears forward. Minerva descended the stairs with unusual speed. Something was wrong. I stood and moved to the window, staying to the side where I could see the street without being visible from outside. A dark sedan was parked across the street, the same one I'd noticed yesterday, or one very similar. 2 men sat in the front seats, watching the brownstone. Archie, Wolfe's voice from the dining room doorway. We've got surveillance. Dark sedan, 2 occupants, parked across the street. The Kapoors? Can't tell from here. Could be them, could be Kramer's people, could be someone else entirely. Determine which, but don't expose yourself unnecessarily. I grabbed my coat and my .38, checked that it was loaded, and headed for the front door. Caesar and Mars flanked me, ready to move. I opened the door carefully and stepped onto the stoop. The sedan's doors opened immediately. 2 men emerged, both South Asian, both in their 40s, both moving with the kind of careful purpose that suggested they were either very nervous or very determined. The taller one called out, "Mr. Goodwin? We need to speak with James Ashcroft. It's urgent." I stayed on the top step, hand near my gun. "Who are you?" "My name is Deepak Kapoor. This is my brother, Rakesh. We're not here to cause trouble. We just need to speak with Mr. Ashcroft." Caesar growled low, not threatening yet, but announcing that violence was an option if needed. The Kapoors stopped at the bottom of the steps, keeping their hands visible. "Mr. Kapoor," I said carefully, "the New York Police Department is looking for you. You're wanted for questioning in connection with the murder of Professor Thomas Wycliffe and the attempted murder of James Ashcroft." "I know. That's why we're here. We didn't kill anyone, Mr. Goodwin, but we know who did, and we need to speak with Mr. Ashcroft before anyone else dies. Tell me first." "No, this is between us and Mr. Ashcroft, between our families. It's about debts that go back nearly a century, and it needs to be settled properly." I was trying to decide whether to bring them inside or call Kramer immediately when Ashcroft appeared in the doorway behind me. "Mr. Kapoor, I'm James Ashcroft. If you want to speak with me, I'm here." "James, get back inside," I said. "No. If Mr. Kapoor has something to say, I'll hear it." He moved to stand beside me on the stoop, despite my better judgment. "You're Deepak Kapoor. Dr. Mehta mentioned you. She said your family lost property during the Agra lootings." "Lost property, lost lives, lost everything." Deepak Kapoor's voice was heavy with old pain. "My great-great-grandfather and his 2 brothers were killed by British soldiers in March 1858. They died protecting their home from thieves. Your great-grandfather led those thieves, Mr. Ashcroft. He ordered my ancestors murdered." "I know. I've read the ledger entry. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Kapoor's voice rose. "You're sorry? Your family has lived in wealth for a century while mine struggled in poverty. You inherited comfort built on our suffering, and now you say you're sorry? I'm trying to make restitution. I'm trying to return what was stolen, to acknowledge the crimes." "It's not enough." Kapoor was shaking now, and his brother put a hand on his arm, steadying him. "Do you understand? It will never be enough. You can't return what was truly taken. You can't bring back the dead. You can't restore the life my family should have had. All you can do is say sorry and expect that to settle a debt written in blood." "Then what do you want from me?" Ashcroft's voice was quiet but steady. "Tell me, what would be enough?" Kapoor and his brother exchanged glances. Then Rakesh spoke for the first time. "We don't want anything from you, Mr. Ashcroft. We came to warn you. There's someone else, someone who does want something from you. Something far worse than restitution or apologies." "Who?" "A man named Philip Hartley, Member of Parliament, Chairman of the British Museum's Board. His great-grandfather was Lieutenant James Hartley, one of the 6 officers who participated in the Agra lootings." Rakesh pulled an envelope from his jacket carefully, moving slowly so I wouldn't shoot him. "This arrived at our home 3 days ago. It's a letter from Hartley offering us $50,000 to kill you." The street seemed to go silent. Even the dogs stopped moving. "What?" I said. "Hartley hired us to murder you, Mr. Ashcroft. He said you were threatening to expose his family's colonial legacy, and that would destroy his political career. He offered $50,000, $25,000 up front, $25,000 after your death was confirmed. He sent detailed information about your movements, your hotel, your plans. He told us where to find you." Ashcroft looked like he might collapse. I moved closer to him, ready to catch him if he fell. "But you didn't do it," I said. "You didn't kill him." "No. We considered it. God help us. We considered it. The money would change our lives. And the justice, the symmetry of it." Deepak's voice broke. "But we're not murderers, Mr. Goodwin. We're not like the men who killed our ancestors. We're teachers, merchants, fathers. We have families, communities, responsibilities. We can't become the monsters we hate. So you came here to warn Ashcroft instead." "We came to give him the evidence." Rakesh handed me the envelope. "Everything is in there. Hartley's letter, bank transfer confirmations for the advance payment, detailed instructions about how to execute the murder and make it look like an accident. He's meticulous, a careful planner." I opened the envelope. Inside was exactly what Rakesh had described. A typed letter on House of Commons stationery, signed by Philip Hartley, MP. Bank documents showing a transfer of $25,000 to an account in Deepak Kapoor's name. And 3 pages of single-spaced instructions detailing how to kill James Ashcroft, dispose of evidence, and establish alibis. "Jesus," I breathed. Wolfe had appeared in the doorway, his bulk filling the frame. "Bring them inside, all of you. We need to review this evidence properly, and standing on the stoop attracts attention." The Kapoors hesitated, looking at Caesar and Mars, who were still in guard mode. "It's safe," I said. "The dogs won't hurt you unless you threaten someone. Come on." We moved into the office, me, Ashcroft and the 2 Kapoor brothers, with the dogs forming a loose perimeter. Wolfe settled into his chair and gestured for the Kapoors to sit. They took the chairs farthest from the desk, clearly nervous about being in a room with 6 guard dogs and a detective who could send them to prison. "Mr. Kapoor," Wolfe said, reading through the documents, "why didn't you go to the police with this immediately?" "Because we'd already accepted the advance payment," Deepak admitted. "We took the $25,000. We intended to refuse the job, but we wanted the money, wanted it desperately. We thought we could take it, and then just disappear. Let Hartley think we'd run off with his money. But then we learned about the attack in Central Park, about Professor Wycliffe dying, and we realized Hartley had hired someone else, maybe multiple people, and we couldn't let more deaths happen because we were too cowardly to come forward. So you came here instead of going to the police because you feared being charged as accessories." "We feared being charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Yes, we didn't kill anyone, but we took money to do it. That's a crime." Rakesh looked miserable. "We're turning ourselves in, Mr. Wolfe. We'll face whatever legal consequences come from our actions. But first we needed to make sure Mr. Ashcroft understood the real threat. Hartley is in New York. He's coordinating multiple attempts, and he won't stop until Mr. Ashcroft is dead." Wolfe studied the documents again. "This letter is dated 9 days ago. The attack in London happened 6 days ago. The timing suggests Hartley sent multiple solicitations. He approached you, you accepted but delayed, so he hired someone else for the London attempt. When that failed, he arranged the attack on Professor Wycliffe, thinking it was Mr. Ashcroft. Now with 2 failures, he's likely planning a 3rd attempt. He looked at me. "Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him Philip Hartley should be arrested immediately for conspiracy to commit murder. Also tell him the Kapoor brothers are here and willing to surrender themselves along with evidence." I made the call. Kramer listened, swore creatively, and said he'd be there in 15 minutes with backup. While we waited, Ashcroft sat in stunned silence. Finally he spoke. "Philip Hartley. I met him once, 2 years ago at a reception in London. He was charming, sophisticated, completely civilized, and he hired people to kill me. His great-grandfather's crimes are about to be exposed," Wolfe said. "That exposure will end his political career and potentially trigger criminal investigations into the British Museum's acquisition practices. He has everything to lose and nothing to gain by letting you live. From his perspective, murder is a rational solution." "That's insane. That's self-interest taken to its logical extreme. Mr. Hartley has spent his life building power and prestige on a foundation of stolen wealth. You threatened that foundation. He responded by attempting to eliminate the threat."
But hiring multiple killers, coordinating attempts across 2 countries, that takes planning, resources, connections.
"All of which Mr. Hartley possesses. He's a member of Parliament with significant wealth and international contacts. Arranging a murder or several murders would be well within his capabilities." Kramer arrived with 4 detectives and 2 uniformed officers. He took one look at the Kapoor brothers and shook his head. "You 2 are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent." "We understand," Deepak said quietly. "We'll cooperate fully. We'll testify against Hartley. Just please believe that we never intended to go through with it. We're not killers. Tell it to the DA. Maybe he'll believe you. Maybe he won't." Kramer turned to me. "The evidence?" I handed him the envelope. He read through it, his expression darkening with each page. "This is gold. Signed letter. Bank transfers. Detailed instructions. Hartley's going down for this." He looked at Wolfe. "Where is Hartley now?" "I don't know, but Mr. Fairfax or Lady Thornbury might. They're part of the same social circle, the same conspiracy to protect Colonial-era theft. Call them, threaten them with obstruction charges if they don't cooperate. One of them will break." Kramer made calls from my desk phone. I listened as he barked orders, threatened consequences, and generally did what Kramer did best: applied overwhelming official pressure until people caved. Lady Thornbury broke first. 15 minutes of aggressive questioning, and she admitted that Hartley was in New York, staying at the University Club on West 54th Street. She claimed she didn't know about the murder conspiracy, that Hartley had told her he was merely trying to negotiate with Ashcroft privately. Kramer didn't believe her, but he had bigger fish to prosecute. "I'm going to pick him up now," Kramer said, hanging up. "Goodwin, Wolfe, you'll need to bring Ashcroft down to the station later to make a formal statement. The Kapoors are coming with me now." He gestured to the uniformed officers, who escorted the brothers out in handcuffs. Deepak Kapoor paused at the door, looking back at Ashcroft. "I'm sorry we took the money. I'm sorry we even considered it. But Mr. Ashcroft, please understand. The anger we feel, it's real, it's justified. Your great-grandfather destroyed our family's future. That kind of damage doesn't heal just because someone apologizes a century later." "I know," Ashcroft said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to try to make things as right as possible. That's all any of us can do." Kapoor turned and left. After they'd gone, the office felt suddenly empty. Ashcroft sat slumped in his chair, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. Harrington had come down during the commotion and was taking notes furiously. This would be a major addition to her story. Wolfe picked up his beer glass, found it empty, and set it down with a sigh. So, Philip Hartley, Member of Parliament, conspired to commit murder to protect his family's stolen legacy. He hired multiple killers, coordinated international attacks, and was willing to eliminate anyone who threatened exposure. That's not historical guilt, Mr. Ashcroft. That's active, ongoing criminality. But the Kapoors refused. They took his money but couldn't go through with it. Yes, which suggests that even people with legitimate grievances and powerful motives can choose mercy over vengeance. The Kapoors had every reason to kill you: historical justice, personal anger, and $50,000. They chose not to. That speaks well of them, even if their initial acceptance of the contract was criminal. Will they go to prison? Possibly, but with their cooperation against Hartley, and given that they committed no actual violence, they may receive reduced sentences. The DA will want Hartley more than he wants the Kapoors. Prosecuting a British MP for conspiracy to commit murder in the United States will be a career-making case. Harrington looked up from her notes. This changes the story completely. It's not just historical crimes anymore. It's active conspiracy, modern murder, and a sitting British politician trying to hide his family's legacy through violence. This is huge. Then write it carefully, Wolfe said. Make sure every fact is verifiable, every quote is accurate, every accusation is supported by evidence. You're about to destroy a man's career and possibly his freedom. Be certain you can defend every word. I will. She gathered her notes. I need to call my editor. This story needs to run immediately before Hartley can flee or destroy evidence. After she'd gone upstairs to make her call from her room phone, with Wolfe's permission, Ashcroft looked at Wolfe with something like awe. You solved it. You identified the killer, gathered the evidence, and ensured his arrest. Professor Wycliffe's murder will be avenged. Professor Wycliffe's murder will be prosecuted, Wolfe corrected. Vengeance and justice are not the same thing, Mr. Ashcroft. Justice operates through law, evidence, and trial. Vengeance operates through violence and vendetta. We've chosen justice, which means Hartley will face legal consequences, not violent ones. That's the only civilized option. But the Kapoors, they'll suffer legal consequences even though they didn't actually hurt anyone. They accepted money to commit murder. That's conspiracy, which is a crime regardless of whether the murder was completed. They'll face punishment appropriate to their actions. That's justice too. Not perfect, not satisfying, but consistent with law. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin. It's Kramer. We got him. Hartley was at the university club having lunch when we arrived. He tried to claim diplomatic immunity, said as an MP he couldn't be arrested by American authorities. I told him conspiracy to commit murder isn't covered by diplomatic immunity, and if he didn't come peacefully, I'd drag him out in handcuffs in front of his luncheon companions. He chose to come peacefully. He admit anything? Not yet. Lawyered up immediately. But with the Kapoor's testimony and the documentary evidence, we've got him cold. DA says this is the easiest murder conspiracy case he's seen in years, everything documented, signed, and traceable. Kramer paused. Tell Wolfe he did good work. He gave us a gift-wrapped prosecution. I relayed this to Wolfe, who accepted the compliment with a slight nod. Inspector Kramer gets his conviction. Mr. Ashcroft gets justice for Professor Wycliffe. Miss Harrington gets her story. And the colonial debt, or at least this installment of it, gets settled through law rather than violence. That's as satisfactory an outcome as we could hope for. What about the other families? Fairfax, Thornbury, the others Dr. Mehta identified. They'll face consequences through repatriation claims, legal proceedings, and public exposure. Some will fight, some will negotiate, some will quietly return items and hope to avoid prosecution. That process will take years, but Hartley's arrest sends a message. Attempting to hide colonial crimes through violence leads to modern prosecution. That message may discourage others from following his example. Fritz appeared in the doorway. Lunch is ready, gentlemen. Beef Wellington, which took considerable effort and should be eaten while hot. We moved to the dining room. Me, Wolfe, Ashcroft, and eventually Harrington, who came down after finishing her call to London. The meal was superb as always, but the conversation was subdued. Everyone was processing what had happened. The revelations, the arrests, the resolution. Over coffee, Harrington broke the silence. My editor wants to run the story tomorrow morning, Wednesday edition. Front page, full spread, with photographs of the key documents. It'll hit London and New York simultaneously. By tomorrow afternoon, every major paper in both countries will be covering it. And then, Ashcroft asked. Then the storm begins. Legal claims, political fallout, museum controversies. The 6 families will all face scrutiny. Some will cooperate, some will fight. Hartley will be prosecuted, the Kapoors will be prosecuted, and you, Mr. Ashcroft, will be both hero and villain, the man who exposed historical crimes, but also triggered modern violence. I can live with that. Can you? Because you'll never have privacy again. Your name will be associated with this story forever. Every article about colonial restitution will mention you. Every legal case will reference your great-grandfather's ledger. You'll spend the rest of your life explaining, defending, justifying. Then I'll explain, defend, and justify. It's the least I can do to honor the people my great-grandfather victimized. Ashcroft set down his coffee cup. Miss Harrington, make sure your story mentions the families who lost everything. The Prasards, the Kapoors, all of them. They deserve recognition. They deserve their stories told. I will. That's the heart of the piece. Not the British family's crimes, but the Indian family's losses and their century-long pursuit of justice. After lunch, we returned to the office. Kramer called again with an update. Hartley was being held without bail, charged with conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. His lawyers were already filing motions, but the evidence was overwhelming. Trial would probably be in 6 months, and conviction was almost certain. The Kapapors were also being held, but the DA was negotiating a plea agreement, full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. They'd probably serve some time, but not the decades they'd face if convicted of conspiracy. By evening, it was done. The case, at least the immediate crisis, was resolved. Hartley was in custody. The Kapors were cooperating. Ashcroft was safe. Harrington's story was written. All that remained was to publish the truth and let the consequences unfold. Wolfe had retired to his chair with a book and his evening beer. I was at my desk reviewing my notes and preparing the final case report. Ashcroft and Harrington were upstairs, no longer clients so much as guests, waiting for the storm that would break tomorrow when the story ran. And the dogs, Caesar, Mars, Apollo, Minerva, Diana, and Loyal, had settled into their evening positions. The crisis past, the fortress secure once more. "Archie," Wolfe said without looking up from his book, "you did well. This was a complex case with multiple actors, competing motives, and significant danger. You managed it competently." "Thanks. Though most of the heavy lifting was yours, gathering everyone, forcing revelations, identifying Hartley as the real threat." "Teamwork, Archie. I provide the deduction, you provide the action. Together we achieve results." He turned a page. "How do you feel about the outcome?" "Satisfied. Mostly. We kept the client alive, caught the killer, and prevented more violence. That's a win. But Wycliffe's still dead. The Kapors still face prison time, even though they didn't kill anyone. And the larger issues, the stolen property, the generational trauma, the historical injustice, those don't resolve just because we caught one killer. No, justice is incremental, Archie. We solve one case at a time, catch one criminal at a time, settle one debt at a time. Grand resolutions are for novels and fairy tales. Reality is messier, slower, less satisfying, but it's what we have. You ever wonder if it's enough? What we do. Every day, and every day I conclude that it's not enough, but it's necessary. Someone must stand between victims and villains. Someone must pursue truth even when it's inconvenient. Someone must choose law over vengeance. If not us, then who? Good question. And the only answer is us. So we continue. He closed his book. Tomorrow Miss Harrington's story will break. The next day legal proceedings will begin. The day after that, new crises will emerge. We'll handle them as they come. That's the work, Archie. That's all it ever is. I nodded, understanding what he meant. The colonial debt wouldn't be settled by one case, one arrest, one story. It would take years, decades, generations. But we'd done our part, protected the innocent, exposed the guilty, and ensured that at least one chapter of historical injustice ended with legal accountability rather than violent revenge. That would have to be enough, because in the end, it was all we could do. Wednesday morning's edition of The Guardian hit London newsstands at 6 a.m. GMT. By noon New York time, every major newspaper in America had picked up the story. The headline Emma Harrington had written was stark and uncompromising. Blood and Empire. How 6 British families built fortunes on colonial murder, and one MP tried to kill to keep it hidden. I was at my desk reading the New York Times' coverage when Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 11 o'clock. He picked up his copy of the Times, read the front page summary, and grunted approval. Miss Harrington writes well. Factual, documented, emotionally compelling without being manipulative. This will have significant impact. It already is. I've had 3 calls this morning from reporters asking for comments, 2 from magazine editors wanting interviews with Ashcroft, and 1 from a lawyer representing Lady Thornbury, threatening to sue us for defamation if we don't retract statements that we never made. Ignore the lawyer. Lady Thornbury's reputation is her own problem, not ours. Wolfe settled into his chair. Have you heard from Inspector Kramer? He called at 9. Hartley's lawyers are trying to get the charges dismissed on procedural grounds, claiming the evidence was obtained improperly. Kramer says it won't work, but they'll tie up the courts for months trying. Let them try. The evidence is overwhelming, and the Kapoor's testimony is voluntary. Hartley will be convicted eventually. He reached for his button. Fritz, coffee please, and inform our guests that breakfast is available if they're hungry. Ashcroft appeared first, looking like he'd barely slept. He was carrying the Morning Times, the Guardian article printed in full on an inside page. "Have you seen this?" he asked, holding up the paper. "Emma's story. It's everywhere. Radio broadcasts, television news programs, newspapers across both countries, everyone is talking about it." "That was the intention," Wolfe said. "Public exposure creates pressure for accountability. Museums will face demands for repatriation. The British families will face legal scrutiny, and the Indian families who were victimized will finally have documentation to support their claims. But the cost, Professor Wycliffe dead, the Kapoors facing prison, my family name destroyed." "Your family name was built on theft and murder, Mr. Ashcroft. Destroying that reputation is not tragic, it's honest accounting. As for Professor Wycliffe and the Kapoors, their fates are consequences of Hartley's actions, not yours. You didn't kill Wycliffe. You didn't hire the Kapoors. You simply exposed truth. What others did with that truth is their responsibility." Emma Harrington came down looking energized rather than exhausted. She'd been on the phone all morning with her editors, apparently, and had that particular glow of a journalist whose story had just exploded into international controversy. "The Guardian's website crashed twice this morning from traffic," she announced, pouring herself coffee. "Every major museum in Britain is being asked to comment on their acquisition practices. The British Museum issued a statement saying they'll review their holdings in light of new historical documentation. That's museum speak for, we're going to be forced to return a lot of stuff, and we're not happy about it." "How are the families responding?" I asked. "Mixed. Fairfax released a statement through his lawyers claiming the allegations are historically inaccurate and legally baseless. Lady Thornbury is threatening to sue me, The Guardian, and apparently anyone who reads the article. The other families are staying quiet, probably consulting with lawyers." She sat down with her coffee. "But here's the interesting part. 3 museums have already contacted me, asking for access to Colonel Ashcroft's ledger. They want to cross-reference their holdings with the documented thefts. That's exactly what we hoped for, institutional cooperation in repatriation. Some institutions will cooperate," Wolfe said. "Others will resist. That's the nature of such controversies. Some parties accept moral responsibility. Others fight to preserve their collections regardless of provenance." The phone rang. I answered. "Goodwin Residence." "Mr. Goodwin, this is Rajiv Banerjee from the Indian Consulate. I'm calling to speak with Mr. Wolfe if he's available." I put him on speaker. "Mr. Banerjee, you're on with Mr. Wolfe. What can we do for you?" "Mr. Wolfe, the Indian government wishes to formally thank you for your role in exposing the Agra lootings and facilitating documentation of stolen artifacts. We've been pursuing repatriation for decades, but without solid evidence of original theft, our claims were often dismissed. Colonel Ashcroft's ledger and Miss Harrington's story provide exactly the documentation we've needed. You're welcome, though I did nothing except protect my client and identify who was trying to kill him. The documentation and exposure were Mr. Ashcroft's and Miss Harrington's work. Nevertheless, we're grateful. I'm also calling to inform you that India will be filing formal repatriation claims with 6 British institutions, including the British Museum, and with several private collectors. We'll be seeking legal return of approximately 200 items documented in the ledger. That will take years to adjudicate." "Yes, but we have time, and now we have evidence. That changes everything." Banerjee paused. "Mr. Wolfe, I should also mention there are other families beyond the Prasads and Kapoors who lost property in the Agra lootings. Dr. Mehta has identified at least 8 families with documented losses. Some of them are quite angry. I wanted to warn you that Mr. Ashcroft may face continued threats." Noted. "We'll maintain appropriate security measures." After hanging up, Wolfe looked at Ashcroft. "You heard that. The threats haven't ended just because Hartley was arrested. Other families may seek their own form of justice, legal or otherwise. I understand, but I can't hide forever. Eventually, I'll have to return to London, resume my life, face whatever comes. Not yet. You'll remain here until we're certain the immediate danger has passed. Give it a few weeks. Let the legal proceedings begin. Let the anger cool slightly, Then you can decide your next steps." Ashcroft nodded reluctantly. "How long will Miss Harrington stay?" "As long as she feels she's in danger. Her article has made her a target just as much as you." Wolfe turned to Harrington. "Have you received any direct threats?" "3 so far, all anonymous, all via telephone to the Guardian's offices. Nothing specific enough to be actionable, but definitely threatening. My editor suggested I stay in New York for a while, let things settle before returning to London. Wise advice. The brownstone has room, and Fritz enjoys having guests. Stay as long as necessary." Over the next several days, the story continued to dominate international news. The British Parliament held emergency sessions to discuss the revelations. The British Museum announced a comprehensive review of its South Asian acquisitions. 3 collectors, including Marcus Fairfax, voluntarily returned items rather than face legal battles and public scrutiny. Philip Hartley remained in custody, his bail repeatedly denied due to flight risk. His political career was finished. His party had suspended him pending trial, and calls for his resignation came from all quarters. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and even his expensive legal team couldn't find grounds to suppress the Kapoor's testimony or the documentary evidence. The Kapoor brothers had been released on bail after agreeing to cooperate fully with prosecutors. They faced charges, but the DA had recommended reduced sentences given their decision not to follow through on the murder contract and their subsequent cooperation. Public opinion was sympathetic. Many saw them as victims of both historical injustice and Hartley's manipulation. Dr. Lakshmi Mehta became an overnight expert, interviewed by every major news outlet about colonial-era theft and repatriation. She handled the attention well, always bringing the focus back to the victims' families and their century-long pursuit of justice. Saul Panzer had quietly closed out his surveillance, satisfied that the immediate threats had been neutralized. The Prasad family returned to normal life in Brooklyn, though Rajan called once to thank us for clearing their names and handling the situation with dignity. And the dogs, our 6 guardians, settled back into routine, maintaining their posts but no longer on high alert. Caesar and Mars at the front, Apollo at the rear, Minerva on the stairs, Diana in the basement, and Loyal under my desk, where he'd made himself a permanent fixture. On Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the case had begun, Inspector Kramer came by with his final update. He looked tired but satisfied, the expression of a cop who'd closed a major case and could finally sleep properly. "Hartley's going to trial in January," he reported, accepting the beer Fritz offered. "His lawyers are still fighting, but it's theatre at this point. The evidence is ironclad. He's looking at 20 years minimum for conspiracy to commit murder, with potential additional charges related to Professor Wycliffe's death." "The Kapoors?" Wolfe asked. "Plea deal approved. They'll plead guilty to conspiracy, serve 18 months, then probation. Given their cooperation and the circumstances, it's fair. They're not hardened criminals. They're regular people who made a terrible decision and then did the right thing before it was too late. And the investigation into Professor Wycliffe's murder. We've connected it to Hartley through financial records. He made a payment to a professional contractor 3 days before the attack, $50,000 transferred through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. We're tracking the contractor now, and when we find him, he'll roll on Hartley to save himself. That'll give us direct evidence of murder for hire, which means Hartley could face life in prison." "Satisfactory," Wolfe said. "You've done thorough work, Inspector. We had good help. Your client gave us the ledger. Your other client wrote the story that flushed out the rats, and you identified who the real threat was. Team effort." Kramer bit down on his cigar. "What happens to Ashcroft and Harrington now? They staying here permanently?" "Until they feel safe returning to London. Mr. Ashcroft has received threats from other victims' families. Miss Harrington has received threats from collectors and institutions upset about the exposure. Neither can return home safely yet. How long will that take? Weeks, possibly months. Once the legal proceedings are well underway and public attention has shifted, they can resume normal lives. Until then, they're guests." After Kramer left, I found myself thinking about what normal lives meant for people like Ashcroft and Harrington. They'd both chosen to expose truth knowing it would come with costs, professional, personal, possibly physical. They'd both persisted despite threats and violence, and now they'd both have to live with the consequences of their choices for the rest of their lives. That took courage, or stubbornness, or maybe just the conviction that some truths needed telling, regardless of personal cost. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Fritz buzzed me from the front entrance. "Archie, there is a woman at the door. She says her name is Anjali Prasad. She's the daughter of Pandit Das, the one from the Ruby case. She would like to speak with Mr. Wolfe." That was from our previous case, 2 months ago, the Himalayan Ruby. I remembered her well, dignified, gracious, and carrying the weight of her father's lifetime pursuit of justice. "Send her in," I said. Mrs. Das entered looking exactly as I remembered, elegant in a white sari with gold embroidery, moving with quiet dignity. Caesar and Mars examined her and recognized her from her previous visit, settling into relaxed attention rather than active guard mode. "Mrs. Das," I said, greeting her, "this is unexpected. How can we help you?" "I read Miss Harrington's story in the newspaper," she said, "about the 6 British families and the Agra lootings, and I remembered my father's journals mentioned those same families. He documented their crimes alongside his search for the Kumari Ruby. I thought perhaps the information might be useful." Wolfe had come down from the plant rooms and now gestured her into the office. "Mrs. Da, please sit. Any information you can provide about the families would indeed be useful, particularly for ongoing repatriation efforts." She opened a leather bag and removed several old journals, the same ones we'd examined during the Ruby case. "My father researched 6 British officers who participated in the Agra lootings. He documented what they stole, where it went, and in some cases what happened to the families they victimized. He never published his research. He was focused on the Ruby, but the information is all here." Wolfe took the journals carefully. "This is valuable documentation, Mrs. Das. May I have these copied for Dr. Mehta and for legal proceedings?" "Yes, that's why I brought them. My father spent his life pursuing justice for historical crimes. I'd like his work to contribute to others achieving that same justice." She paused. "I also wanted to thank you again, Mr. Wolfe. The Kumari Ruby has been returned to India and installed in the new temple in Agra. The dedication ceremony is next month. My father's dream finally realized. I'm pleased the outcome was satisfactory. More than satisfactory, it was redemptive." She stood to leave. "I won't take more of your time. I simply wanted to contribute what I could to Miss Harrington's important work." After she left, Wolfe began examining the journals. I watched him turn pages, occasionally making notes, his expression growing increasingly focused. "Archie," he said after perhaps 20 minutes, "Mrs. Das's father documented something interesting. He tracked one of the 6 officers, Captain Geoffrey Hammond, whose collection was supposedly dispersed in the 1920s. According to Pandit Das's research, some of Hammond's collection wasn't sold. It was hidden, transferred to family members in America, who changed their names to avoid association with colonial controversy." "Where in America?" "New York, specifically Manhattan. And one of the documented items in Hammond's collection was a temple sculpture currently on display at the Brooklyn Museum, attributed to anonymous donor." He looked up. "That sculpture is worth approximately $2 million, and if Pandit Das's research is accurate, it was stolen from a temple in Agra in 1857 and has been in the Hammond family's possession ever since." "So there are more cases, more stolen items, more families affected." "Yes. The colonial debt doesn't end with 6 British families and 200 items, Archie. It's vast. Thousands of objects, dozens of families, crimes spanning decades. We've resolved one case. There will be others." "You planning to take them all on?" "No. But when clients come to us seeking justice for historical crimes, we'll handle them as we handled this one, with thoroughness, integrity, and commitment to truth. That's the work. That's all it ever is." I nodded, understanding. The case of James Ashcroft and the colonial debt was closed, but the larger story, the story of colonial theft, generational trauma, and the slow, difficult pursuit of justice, would continue for years, probably decades. We'd played our part. We'd kept the client alive, caught the killer, and facilitated exposure of historical crimes. Other cases would come, requiring the same skills, the same dedication, the same willingness to wade into complicated moral territory where easy answers didn't exist. But for now, the brownstone was quiet. The clients were safe, the dogs were at their posts, and Nero Wolfe was reading journals by a man who died 4 years ago, still pursuing justice from beyond the grave. Some debts transcended death. Some quests continued across generations. Some truths demanded telling regardless of how long they'd been buried. That was the work. And we'd keep doing it, case by case, truth by truth, justice by justice, until there were no more debts to settle, or we were too old to settle them. Whichever came first. 3 weeks later, on a mild December morning, James Ashcroft and Emma Harrington finally left the brownstone. They'd stayed longer than anyone expected, not because of continued threats, but because they'd become oddly comfortable in our fortress. Ashcroft had found solace in routine, in Fritz's cooking, and in long conversations with Wolfe about history, morality, and the price of inherited guilt. Harrington had used the time to write follow-up stories, coordinate with museums on repatriation efforts, and generally become the international authority on colonial-era theft and its modern consequences. But all guests eventually leave, and on that December morning, they packed their bags, thanked Fritz profusely, and prepared to return to London. "You're sure it's safe?" Ashcroft asked me as I helped carry his luggage to the waiting taxi. "As safe as it'll ever be. Hartley's in prison awaiting trial. The Kapoors are cooperating with authorities. Most of the other families are focused on legal defense, not violence. You'll face hostility, probably some harassment, but not murder attempts." "That's reassuring, I suppose." He shook my hand. "Thank you, Mr. Goodwin, for everything. You saved my life more than once." "That's the job. Just try not to need saving again. It's exhausting." Harrington was saying goodbye to Wolfe in the office. I joined them in time to hear her final words. "Mr. Wolfe, you once told me that journalism and investigation aren't so different. We both pursue truth regardless of who it inconveniences. I understand that now. Thank you for teaching me the difference between exposing truth recklessly and exposing it responsibly. You would have learned eventually. I merely accelerated the process." Wolfe regarded her with something that might have been approval. "Continue your work, Miss Harrington. The world needs journalists willing to tell uncomfortable truths. Just try not to get yourself killed in the process." "I'll do my best." After they left, the brownstone felt oddly empty. Fritz began the process of returning the guest rooms to their normal state, stripping beds, airing rooms, erasing the evidence of 3 weeks' occupation. The dogs settled back into pure routine rather than extended vigilance. And Wolfe returned to his orchids and his books, the case closed, the bill paid, the work complete. I was at my desk that afternoon, filing the final case documents, when the phone rang. "Goodwin Residence." "Mr. Goodwin, this is Dr. Mehta. I wanted to inform you that India has formally filed repatriation claims for 187 items documented in Colonel Ashcroft's ledger. The legal proceedings will begin next month. I thought Mr. Wolfe would want to know." "He will. How long do you think the cases will take?" "Years, probably. Some museums will settle quickly to avoid bad publicity. Others will fight every claim. Some items will be returned. Others will remain tied up in courts. But Mr. Goodwin, we're finally making progress, real documented progress toward justice. That's because of what you and Mr. Wolfe did. We just solved a murder and prevented more violence. The justice is your work, and Ashcroft's and Harrington's." "Perhaps. But without your intervention, Ashcroft would be dead, and Harrington would have published her story without proper protection. You made the difference between exposure with consequences and exposure with catastrophe. That matters." After hanging up, I relayed this to Wolfe. He nodded without looking up from his book. "Dr. Mehta is persistent. She'll see those repatriations through, even if it takes decades. That's the kind of dedication that achieves results. Like Pandit Das before her. Like Mrs. Das with the ruby. Like Ashcroft with the ledger. Persistence seems to be a common thread. Persistence is the only thread that matters, Archie. Brilliance fades, luck changes, resources deplete. But persistence, choosing to continue despite obstacles, despite setbacks, despite the certainty that complete victory is impossible, that's what separates those who achieve justice from those who merely wish for it. I thought about that while finishing my filing. The colonial debt case had been messy, complicated, and morally ambiguous. We'd caught one killer, but others remained free. We'd exposed 6 families, but hundreds more probably existed with similar histories. We'd facilitated some repatriations, but most stolen items would never be returned. Incomplete victory. Partial justice. Incremental progress. But progress nonetheless. Inspector Kramer called later that afternoon with his final update. Philip Hartley had attempted to negotiate a plea bargain, 15 years in exchange for pleading guilty to conspiracy and attempted murder. The DA had rejected it, insisting on trial and a full accounting of Hartley's crimes. Trial was scheduled for February, and conviction was considered virtually certain. The Kapoor brothers had begun serving their reduced sentences, 18 months, with possibility of early release for good behavior. Their story had become something of a cause célèbre in certain circles, ordinary people driven to desperate choices by historical injustice, then choosing mercy over money at the critical moment. Some legal scholars were arguing they shouldn't have been charged at all, that accepting a murder contract and then refusing to fulfill it shouldn't be criminal. The debate would continue long after their release. Professor Wycliffe's death had been officially connected to Hartley through the professional contractor Kramer's. People had tracked down a career criminal who'd agreed to testify against Hartley in exchange for a reduced sentence. That testimony would seal Hartley's fate and add murder charges to the conspiracy counts. Justice slowly grinding toward resolution. That evening, after Fritz had served an excellent dinner, roast lamb with herbs and a wine reduction that made me wish I could cook, Wolfe and I sat in the office with our after-dinner drinks. "Archie," Wolfe said, setting down his empty glass, "what's your assessment of the case? Not the mechanics, the success of investigation, the capture of the killer, the protection of clients. I mean the moral dimension. Did we achieve anything meaningful, or did we simply add legal proceedings to historical injustices?" I thought about it. We kept Ashcroft alive so he could complete his work. We helped Harrington publish her story safely. We identified and stopped a killer. We prevented the Prasads from being falsely accused. We gave the Kapoors a chance at redemption by refusing Hartley's contract. And we documented evidence that's now being used for repatriation claims that might actually return stolen property to its rightful owners. That's not nothing. No. But is it enough? Is anything ever enough? The crimes happened 98 years ago. Most of the perpetrators and victims are dead. The property has changed hands dozens of times. Legal systems struggle to address wrongs that transcended legal frameworks. Perfect justice is impossible. I paused. But imperfect justice is still justice. Partial accountability is still accountability. And progress, even incremental, frustrating, incomplete progress, is still progress. Wolfe nodded slowly. Well said. I agree. We cannot fix the past, Archie. We can only address its consequences in the present. We cannot restore what was taken a century ago. We can only work toward restoring what's possible now. And we cannot eliminate inherited guilt or inherited anger. We can only try to channel them toward constructive resolution rather than destructive vengeance. Did we succeed? We prevented immediate violence. We exposed ongoing criminality. We facilitated legal processes that may eventually achieve partial restitution. By the limited standards of detective work, yes, we succeeded. He reached for the button on his desk. "Fritz, brandy, please." The good bottle. Fritz appeared with the brandy and 3 glasses, one for Wolfe, one for me, and one for himself. Wolfe raised his glass. To incomplete victories and partial justice, to persistence in the face of impossible odds, and to the belief that truth, once exposed, creates opportunities for resolution that secrecy never could. Mr. Ashcroft chose exposure over silence. Miss Harrington chose publication over safety. The Kapoors chose mercy over money. We honored those choices by protecting them and facilitating their consequences. That's worthy work, gentlemen. We drank. Fritz returned to the kitchen to finish cleaning up. Wolfe went upstairs to bed, and I sat at my desk reviewing the case one final time before filing everything away. The Colonial Debt, the case we'd titled it in our records, though Harrington's story had given it a dozen different names in a dozen different articles. A case about inherited guilt, generational trauma, and the question of whether historical wrongs could ever be truly settled. We'd done what we could, kept people alive, caught killers, exposed truth, facilitated justice. And in doing so, we'd honored something important, the principle that some debts, even debts incurred by the long dead, still demanded attention, still required acknowledgement, still merited pursuit of accountability. Not because perfect justice was achievable, but because the pursuit itself mattered. Because silence was complicity, because concealment was continuation, because forgetting was betrayal of everyone who'd suffered and never received acknowledgement. The colonial debt would never be fully paid. The stolen property would never be completely returned. The murdered would never be restored to life. The generational trauma would never be entirely healed. But what we could do, what Ashcroft and Harrington and Dr. Mehta and Mrs. Das and countless others were doing, was refuse to forget, refuse to accept that the past was irrelevant, refuse to believe that historical crimes were beyond the reach of modern accountability. That refusal, that persistence, that stubborn insistence on truth and justice, that was the real victory. Everything else was just paperwork. I closed the case file, locked it in the cabinet, and looked around the office. Through the bulletproof windows, I could see West 35th Street settling into evening quiet. From the basement came the soft sounds of Diana making her rounds. Upstairs, Minerva would be on the stairs, Apollo at the rear entrance, Caesar and Mars at the front. And loyal, faithful, courageous Loyal, who'd walked 200 miles to save his master's legacy, was under my desk, his steady breathing a reminder that some loyalties transcended circumstance, some bonds defied explanation, and some commitments were simply absolute. I reached down and scratched behind his notched ear. He looked up at me with those intelligent eyes, his tail thumping once against the floor. "Good boy," I said, and I meant it. Because at the end of the day, after all the complications and moral ambiguities and impossible choices, that's what the work came down to: loyalty, to clients, to truth, to justice, to the belief that what we did mattered, even when we couldn't see all the consequences, even when victory was incomplete, even when the best we could achieve was slightly less injustice than existed before we started. The colonial debt case was closed. But the work, the endless, necessary, occasionally maddening work of pursuing truth and justice in a world that preferred comfortable lies and convenient amnesia, that work continued. Tomorrow, another client would ring our buzzer with another impossible problem. Another case would demand our attention, our skills, our commitment, and we'd take it on, because that's what we did. That's what we'd always do, until we couldn't anymore. Which, given Nero Wolfe's stubbornness and my own refusal to admit defeat, would probably be never. I poured myself one more drink, raised it in silent toast to all the people who'd fought for justice in this case, the living and the dead, the successful and the failed, the heroes and the merely persistent, and drank. The brownstone settled into night. The dogs maintained their watch. The fortress held. And somewhere in London, James Ashcroft and Emma Harrington were probably still fighting their battles, still pursuing truth, still refusing to accept that historical crimes were beyond accountability. Good for them. The world needed more people willing to fight impossible battles for incomplete victories. And if they needed help again, if another threat emerged, if another killer appeared, if another crisis demanded intervention, they knew where to find us. 9118 West 35th Street, New York. Where Nero Wolfe solved mysteries, Fritz cooked miracles, and 6 loyal dogs stood watch over truth, justice, and the occasionally foolish humans who pursued both. We'd be ready. We were always ready. Because that was the work. And the work never ended. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in June, forwarded from London through the Guardian's offices to Emma Harrington, then sent on to the brownstone where she'd asked her mail to be held while she was travelling. I opened it. Harrington had given permission, and read with growing interest. Dear Miss Harrington, my name is Philip Hammond, grandson of Captain Geoffrey Hammond, one of the 6 officers you exposed in your article about the Agra lootings. I'm writing to inform you that my family has decided to return all items in our possession that can be documented as originating from colonial-era theft. This decision was not easy. These items have been in my family for generations, and admitting their origin requires acknowledging that my great-grandfather was a thief and likely a murderer. But your article, and Mr. Ashcroft's courage in exposing his own family's crimes, convinced me that continued concealment is both morally wrong and practically futile. I'm working with Dr. Lakshmi Mehta to identify rightful owners and facilitate returns. Thus far, we've documented 17 items worth approximately $800,000. I wanted you to know that your work made this possible. Truth has consequences, some destructive, some redemptive. In my case, it's been redemptive. I'm a better man for facing my family's history honestly. Thank you for your courage in publishing what needed to be told. Sincerely, Philip Hammond. I showed the letter to Wolfe. He read it, made a sound that might have been approval, and handed it back. Progress, Archie. Slow, uncomfortable, costly progress, but progress nonetheless. One family returning 17 items. That's something. It's everything, because one family becomes an example. Other families see that acknowledgement doesn't destroy them, it frees them. More will follow. Not all, but some, and some is better than none. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin Residence. Archie, it's Harrington. I'm in Delhi. The Indian government is holding a ceremony next week. Formal acceptance of the first repatriated items from the Agra lootings. They've invited James and me to attend, and they specifically requested that Mr. Wolfe be invited as well. Can you ask if he'd consider traveling to India for the ceremony? I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Wolfe. Harrington says India is holding a repatriation ceremony next week. You're invited. I don't travel. Not to India, not to London, not to New Jersey if it can be avoided. That's what I figured. I uncovered the mouthpiece. He declines, but he sends his compliments and congratulations. I expected that. But Archie, you should come. You were part of this. You kept us alive long enough to finish the work. You deserve to see the results. I looked at Wolfe. He waved a hand dismissively. Go if you wish. Fritz can manage the brownstone for a week. The dogs will keep him company, and I'll survive without your constant interruptions and irreverent commentary. You'll miss me. I'll tolerate your absence. There's a difference. I grinned. Tell Harrington I'll think about it. If I come, I'm bringing Loyal. He walked 200 miles for justice once. He deserves to see what justice looks like when it's finally achieved. After hanging up, I sat at my desk and thought about it. A trip to India, a ceremony celebrating the return of stolen property, a visible public acknowledgement that historical wrongs mattered and could be addressed, even imperfectly, even incompletely. That would be something to see. But then I looked around the office at Wolfe in his chair, at the files stacked neatly in the cabinet, at the dogs positioned throughout the brownstone, at the familiar, comfortable, safe space we'd built and maintained. And I realized the real victory wasn't in ceremonies or public acknowledgements, it was in the daily work, the persistent, unglamorous, often frustrating work of pursuing truth and justice, one case at a time, one client at a time, one victory at a time. That work happened here, in this office, in this brownstone, with this stubborn genius, and these loyal dogs, and this commitment to doing what was right even when it was hard. India could celebrate without me. I had work to do, and that work, that endless, necessary, occasionally maddening work, was exactly where I wanted to be. Changed my mind, I called to Wolfe. I'm staying. Someone needs to make sure you don't take impossible cases while I'm gone. I only take impossible cases, Archie. That's what makes them interesting. Exactly my point. He almost smiled. Almost. And that was enough. Because this, the brownstone, the work, the partnership, the commitment, this was enough. This was everything. And I wouldn't trade it for all the ceremonies in India. The work continued. And so did we.